Hello everyone, and welcome to Techstrong TV. Today is Tuesday, January 24th, and I hope you all are having a wonderful day so far. I'm your host, William Willis, and in today's show, we're going to bring you some fantastic interviews with incredible guests from around the world, so stay tuned. As always, I'm going to start off with our Techstrong News Recap, filling you in on the biggest tech headlines that are making waves. Then we will go to Allen, where he sits down with David Williams, Senior Vice President of Market Strategy at Quality, to talk about the current IT infrastructure practices and how they enable, challenge, or inhibit IT and business objectives. Allen will then meet with Harpreet Singh and Kosuke Kawaguchi, co-CEOs at Launchable, to talk about how Launchable is closing the testing communication gap with personalized Slack notifications. Then, Lori LaRusso of JFrog will moderate a panel of industry experts and developers, including Amit Serpur of Sternum, Amit Ezer of JFrog, Jim Mercer of IDC, and Stephen Chin of JFrog, to collectively explore the security and operational challenges that come with increasing the use of software at the edge and explain why DevOps for IoT is a must-have. Then we go to AWS reInvent, where Mitch met with David Klein, CMO of Kentic, to talk about network observability and how to answer any question about your network quickly. Also at AWS, Mike Vizard met with Nick Van Wiggeren, Vice President of Engineering at PlanetScale, to discuss PlanetScale Boost, a new product that improves query performance and eliminates the need for external database caching. Then at AWS reInvent, Mike also met with Rick Tam Daniels, General Vice President of Ecosystem Alliances and Technology at Informatica, to discuss a new suite of data cloud management tools and services that will democratize data for users within an enterprise. We will then wrap up this broadcast with 2 episodes of View with Vizard. In the first episode, Mike interviews Approved CEO Ted Morocco, as Ted explains what makes securing software-defined vehicles a major challenge as more software is embedded within them. Then, Mike interviews Siolo CEO Almog Apirion, as Almog explains what's required to rein in cybersecurity costs in 2023, while at the same time implementing zero-trust policies based on identity. And that's what we have coming up for you on this episode of Techstrong TV. So without further ado, let's get the show started. Enjoy.
CISO Talk, to hear how real-world CISOs are dealing with today's real-world issues. From enabling secure remote workers to accelerating secure cloud adoption, defending against a pandemic of security attacks and beyond, CISO Talk covers the cyber topics you want to learn about. With your hosts, Unisys CISO Matt Newfield and MediaOps CEO Alan Schimmel, featuring a revolving panel of CISO cyber experts. This is where CISOs talk. Join us on digitalanarchist.com and techstrong.tv.
Hi again, everyone. Here are the headlines for January 24th. First up, AWS has revealed plans to invest $35 billion in the construction and expansion of data centers in Virginia as part of an agreement with the state government. AWS has stated that this expansion, which is set to be completed by 2040, will provide 1,000 new jobs. The agreement still needs the approval of the legislature, but has received support from major leaders in its General Assembly. Zooming out, Northern Virginia has become a preferred location for data centers in recent years, with these centers becoming increasingly common. This being said, data centers have become a contentious subject, as well as residents in these areas are raising concerns over both noise pollution and their environmental impact. Supporters of the agreement, on the other hand, argue that the data centers provide jobs and revenue to local governments that they would otherwise be without. So regardless how this all plays out, it will be interesting to see the future, as the number of data centers is only expected to rise in the upcoming years. Next, Microsoft has announced an extension of its partnership with OpenAI, the AI startup behind ChatGPT, with a large multi-year investment. Microsoft has stated that it plans to increase its investments in the development and deployment of specialized supercomputing systems to accelerate AI research and deploy AI systems across its consumer and enterprise products, as well as creating new categories of digital experiences. OpenAI, on the other hand, plans to use the funding to continue its research and develop safer, more useful, and more powerful AI. Additionally, OpenAI has stated that Microsoft Azure Cloud Platform will continue to be the exclusive cloud provider of OpenAI. This partnership comes as companies such as Google are working feverishly to develop AI products since ChatGPT's launch. In other news, the University of Texas and Texas A&M University have joined a growing number of public universities in the United States that have banned TikTok on their campuses by blocking access on campus Wi-Fi networks. This decision to ban the social media app follows similar actions by other public universities across several states, including Alabama, Arkansas, Florida, and Georgia. The campus TikTok bans were triggered by executive orders issued by state governors recently. Despite being popular in the United States, TikTok is currently facing intense scrutiny from the federal and state governments over concerns about the app's ability to collect user data. Additionally, ByteDance has been criticized for its lack of transparency about how data flows between US and China operations. As of now, the bans may not have greatly impacted TikTok's popularity, but they do raise questions about the app's future in the United States. Next up, the music streaming service Spotify has announced that it will be cutting 6% of its global workforce, which amounts to approximately 600 employees. Spotify stated that the company had overinvested before its revenue growth and that the current trajectory was not sustainable. The layoffs come as the company faces a difficult economic environment and the change-up of several C-level executives. This move follows similar layoffs announced by other companies such as Microsoft and Google last week, and showing that how even the music industry can be affected by the current economic environment. On Security Boulevard, we have an article looking at how the SEC is expected to finalize its proposal for requiring organizations to attest to its cybersecurity ability at a board level. This expected change in the SEC cybersecurity requirements is meant to shift some of the accountability to boards, as well as bolster security best practices. To learn more, go to securityboulevard.com. On DevOps.com, we have an article looking at a report showing a rise in platform engineering. In Puppet's 2023 State of the DevOps report, 94% agreed that platform engineering is helping their organizations. This article gives a deep dive into the report while also showing the state of platform engineering and how it helps DevOps. To learn more, go to DevOps.com. Finally, on Container Journal, we have an article looking at how to run serverless containers using AWS EKS with Fargate. This article gives a comprehensive demo on how Fargate can be used with EKS to run Kubernetes applications more easily. To learn more, go to containerjournal.com. And that's today's Techstrong News Recap.
SecurityBoulevard.com is the leading resource for news, analysis, and education on challenges facing the cybersecurity industry. SecurityBoulevard.com covers all aspects of cybersecurity, including data security, DevSecOps, cloud security, application security, network security, security threats, and more. SecurityBoulevard.com has the largest selection of security content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.securityboulevard.com to learn more. SecurityBoulevard.com, home of Security Bloggers Network.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Techstrong TV. My next guest here on Techstrong TV today is David Williams. David is with Quali. Quali is a company I've known about for a really long time. Many of you may have heard them, and some of you may even be customers. But I'm sure there's some of you who are not familiar with Quali, so we're going to dive into that and then have a really great discussion, I think. But first, let's welcome David. David, welcome to Techstrong TV.
It's great to be here, Alan. Thank you.
Thank you. So, David, before we even jump into Quali and what we want to talk into, let's talk a little bit about David Williams. Share with our audience kind of your story a little bit.
Sure. I've been in this industry a while, so I'm going to keep this as brief as possible. So I started my career in systems and networks operations. So I started at the hard end of the equation, if you like, actually working with technology and delivering it as an operations person to a whole set of production systems. But I moved into software development over a period of time, and that ended up me moving into product management. So I've sort of gone from using the technology to working to design it and then actually managing the product lines in regards to delivering it to clients. But prior to Quali, I was a senior vice president at Digital.ai. I had a similar role at CA Technologies. I worked at BMT Software, and I also was the head of products and management at IBM Tivoli. So it's been a bit of a journey. In amongst all that, I've worked for a number of startups, specifically around DevOps. That was where I really started to engage with the startup community. So much goodness was coming from that overall approach. And I thought this is a really good time to invest my time into actually solving something that was fairly difficult, that was different from what had been happening before. And what helped me a little bit was I'd spent also 8 years of my life as an analyst at Gartner, covering automation and DevOps and a number of other practices. So it gave me a flavor of, when talking to clients, when you're an analyst, you hear an awful lot of good, bad, and ugly stories around technology and how it can support your business. So it sort of like made me a little bit smarter on what the realities are in regards to adopting technology. So when I moved back into becoming a vendor again, at least it gave me a little bit of a color background to be able to make sure that the technology was relevant, was valuable, and resonated with that current market condition. So it's been a bit of a journey. I joined Quali over 2 years ago. I was attracted to the company purely because it was tackling a very hard problem that I hadn't seen really solved. It was one of fragmented infrastructure, the complexity around cloud management. And it was really a maturity type of journey where companies were extremely flexible in how they approach the whole space. But it gave a level of flexibility that lost a little bit of control, visibility. And now the market obviously wants to be relevant. It needs to have infrastructure tied to value. It needs to be able to cost and plan more accurately. But you've got to do that without upsetting everybody. You've got to make sure that you're implementing solutions that do not disrupt processes, et cetera. And that's why we use a model, really, when we talk to our clients to understand where are they on the journey in automation in regards to their whole infrastructure. And exactly, how does that affect the processes that they have, the organizations that they're working with and that they have themselves, and what is the culture within an organization. So understanding that basic metrics also enables you to position your technology in a little bit more of a creative, more accurate way. So, technology is not going to solve all your problems in respect to organization, but you can have technology that actually take it into consideration when you deploy it. And that's what we build a model for. And that's what attracted me to Quali.
I love it. I haven't heard Tivoli mentioned in a long time. I appreciate that. I want you to know, you kind of made me smile. It was, the idea, I don't want to waste our time on it. We could do it at another time. But Tivoli, it just became the monster of many, many tentacles that could do anything and everything, sometimes it seemed. But anyway, you're right. We've seen it interesting. I guess it's the nature of nature, right? Some people say, do we move towards simplicity, or as the time, arrow goes this way, do we become more complex? Well, when we talk about infrastructure as it relates to computing and so forth, I think there are a lot of people who say this baby's gotten very, very complex, right?
Yeah.
It seems the more we evolve, the more that timeline moves to the right, the more complex our infrastructure becomes.
Yep. Exactly.
Go ahead.
I think, and the more complex our infrastructure becomes, the more we yearn within our industry for something to help, right? To reduce that complexity.
Go ahead.
Well, what I can say is your Tivoli mention, by the way, was interesting. That taught me a little bit. What it taught me is that you can't make things simpler by adding something that's equally as complex as the problem you're solving. And I'm going to say that's as succinct as I'm going to say.
That was politically correct, too, because when I said a monster, I meant a monster. But anyway, but you're right. But here's the trick, or the unrealistic kind of childlike fantasy that we live in, is that we want to somehow reduce that complexity without any reduction in functionality, without losing anything. And so that's a really hard that's making gold out of lead, right? We want all this great things that this complexity brings us, but we want it less complex, and we want everything. We want our cake and eat it too, right?
Yeah.
And so let's talk a little bit about how companies like Quali are addressing this, because you have a couple of audiences you play to. You play to the customer, the IT consumer, who may be in fact the employees of the company where you're at, right? They're not necessarily external customers. They could be internal customers. You have your DevOps engineers and your SREs and your ops folk who have to manage these things. You have your developers who have to develop and deploy on it. The new thing today is platform engineers, right?
Yes.
We have platform engineers who are kind of trying to map this all out. How do you win this, David?
Wow, that's a good. Well, see this is, in the software industry, we have this behavior, and the behavior is to make things simpler. We add something. It's obviously counterproductive if you just think about the whole premise of it'll make your life easier if you just add something additional to what you already do. And to your point, there is a number of audiences that are participating, especially with infrastructure the way it is. There is the managers or the leaders within an organization that have always strived to get visibility and a level of control over what is being used, how it's used, and why it's being used. And yet you have an awful lot of enablement at the doers level, the developer level, at some of the operational levels, where you have technical people who feel very comfortable with using the tools that a cloud provider would offer you, as well as the developers in the DevOps infrastructure, where they're very much, I would say the dominant thing is more of infrastructure as code. Some people are still using configuration management, YAML type of technology. Mm-hmm. There's a whole bunch, and there's also obviously the release engines that come from a prior era of maturity in regards to the infrastructure. But to your point, the stacks are getting more complex. The places that you locate things are getting more distributed. And so therefore, how do you make sure that the technology that you're providing actually does remove something and is accepted by the people who have to work with the infrastructure every day, but also provide the business, especially in today's market conditions where cost is an issue and value to the business is an issue with everything that is used? How do you make sure that that is accounted for? It's a pretty tricky thing. So as you've got from our previous comments around some companies I've worked for, the idea there was to have this Uber technology that basically took over and everything was subsumed by it. The problem with automated infrastructure is that very few technologies see themselves as subordinate to another one. So what you end up doing is having, not only are you have the complexity of the infrastructure stacks, you also have automation that is stacked on each other, where one piece of automation that is blind to what the piece it's triggering triggers another piece of automation. So when it comes to solving problems, issues with infrastructure deployments, whatever it is, just looking at what the problem is hard. So what we did was we really looked at it from, okay, we need to have something that provides the ability for organizations to have what they use subsumed into a control plane of sorts. It's the ability to be able to take what you already use within all your groups, because each team may have different types of automation and infrastructure. They may even use the same type, but differently. So you're having different command sequences, different services are being pulled in. So even if you're using one product, one scripted type of AIC, you're really going to have multiple variations of that. So how do you bring that in? So how we used our model was really to say, okay, we need to make sure that we can subsume what is being used today, make it simple, make it easier to use. Then we need to be able to provide that information of what is being used in its disparate way and make it consistent at a layer that enables the business to say, I now understand what the infrastructure is being used for and who's using it. And then, of course, to your other point is the consumers, the people that actually want infrastructure, but don't necessarily have the skills with which to provision it and make it happen. So typically that goes to an operations team or someone that gives them a sandbox or something that they can work with. But it's got, why do that if you can do it through a self-service portal that gives you all the information about a set of an environment that you need, and then you can actually apply it and bring it out automatically without that. So you've got these levels. You've got the people that actually have the skills to do infrastructure that are actually supplying it to many other people. You've got the management layer that wants to understand what's going on. And then you've got the consumers that want to be able to use infrastructure, but they don't have the skills. So what we really did was look at it in that way. So we built a technology that can basically bring in IAC, normalizing the information so it's consistent. So whether you're using a YAML or an IAC or something, it brings the information into a consistent layer. That enables you to be able to apply consistent policy to things. Now things are the same. Once you can normalize something, discover it automatically, normalize it and make it look the same to a point where you understand what it's doing, extracting the very specific infrastructure pieces, and then use that as building blocks with which to then leverage it for the consumer. So how can you take all that really smart knowledge and those few very key infrastructure savvy people, how do you get those skills and then make what they do much more usable? Then that is the way that this control plane can work. And that's how in Quali, that's what attracted me to the company, was this philosophy of don't make people do things completely different. Don't implement something that changes the way that they do stuff. Make it open for them to use what they're familiar with using, but also provide them with the ability to reuse stuff, share it across different development teams. So in a pipeline, what you develop upon and all the instances of that infrastructure can be leveraged in regards to what you test against. You're using a consistent thing. You're not building it again in test, building again in release. So you want to be able to have that consistency, and you can build that within the normalization layers. That's the thing that goes away. The complexity goes away. What you're adding as well is you want to take away the governance regulations and the securities and the secrets management. You want to be able to have making sure that if you want to build infrastructure, that it complies to all your internal regs, etc. So the control plane applies that because it's normalized, and then you can provide the catalog to your infrastructure, to the consumers. So you take all that, you can actually provide environments in a catalog or in a way that enables it to be more self-service. So at one end of the equation, you could actually embed the capabilities for the developer within something like an IDP. So you've got basically something that is within their environment, and you just pull the infrastructure in. And at the higher level within operations, they can actually integrate it with their ITIL type of approach technologies, their IT service management products. And that's how we really gone to market with our product. And that's why enterprises are using us in this way, specifically in this market conditions.
It's interesting too, though, because when you look at this problem, it really, anytime you can get the DevOps audience and the ITIL audience around the same solutions, around the same problems, you're doing good, right? Because traditionally they're here and here. I'm interested, David. So, you talk to your customers, you talk to the people who watch this video. Look, they're aware. They live this problem, right? This is not a revelation to them that this is an issue.
Nope.
When you explain this to them, and what Quali can do, for instance, right? What's the reaction? Is it, I know that, it sounds too good to be true? Is it, show me? Is it, what kind of reaction are you getting from the field when you talk to them about like this?
Well, infrastructure has been around for since technology was invented. So there's always been the need to associate compute with peripheral devices. And then obviously it got out of control and is now what it is today. So you get, I would say that when you come in with a very specific value prop to a client. So they say, we want greater visibility on our governance model, or we want to be able to have the ability to plan our costs, which can only really be done if you actually understand how you're provisioning infrastructure in support of an outcome. So you can't plan your costs and prioritize and optimize your infrastructure unless obviously you understand what it's being used for. Then you can apply this is just for prototyping, this is for mission critical stuff, and then you can align it that way. So we can go in there. When we go in there, we typically can talk about that to that layer. But however, the skepticism, to your point, comes when they say, but we have, a dozen technologies that do. We got a cloud set of technologies. We use these for IAC. We have something that does, that does our. We have a management for the cloud platform. We have all these things. We have configuration tooling. Why? And they can all do aspects of infrastructure management. What exactly are you bringing? So there's always this ability to be able to say, it's okay to talk to the layer which sees the organization's challenge in regards to infrastructure, but it gets more complex as you talk to the specific departmentals or the divisions or the teams that use it, because they're not thinking the big model. They're thinking, this is what I need for me. This is what I use. So how we actually discuss that is really the ability to provide what they use today. We can subsume a majority of it, especially if it is the coding technologies, the YAMLs, et cetera, that most people build. Even when you say homegrown, typically what you're doing is building something upon some open source technology that's out there. So what we're actually, when we discuss it with the developers, we can show them how we can implement all the infrastructure in a way that takes away huge amounts of the restraints that are currently that's been put in their place. For example, consistency on governance, policies and tagging, all these things that inhibit your ability to do it. Even if you get new infrastructure coming in, you might end up with another technology that's specifically to automate that piece. So what we can do is we can take some of that away and build it into an environment that contains the data you're using, the infrastructure you're provisioning and using, as well as all the tools that you would like to use with which to manipulate that part of the, say, application's lifecycle. Sure. And I think that resonates well with the developers when you show how it's fully integrated with, as I say, their development platforms. It integrates with all their CI/CD technologies. It brings them in. It feeds from the Git. It's an integral part of the Git. So it shows that you can use a technology that actually enables you to do things faster, but also leverage what you've already done. And it still enables you to do the IAC. So to the point you made, it's like you can talk to a very level that says, I need that, but you can't force people to use it. So our technology doesn't force people to change.
Yeah, absolutely. David, I'm ashamed to tell you how far over time we are. But it's okay. It was a great discussion. I think it's something that's interesting to our audience, especially. For people who want to get more information on Quali, the website, let me see, QUALI, is that it?
Yep. www.quali. Yep. .com. And that will have all the information and detail about what I've discussed today.
Thank you. Hey, thanks for coming on Techstrong TV today and diving in.
Always a pleasure.
Yeah, anytime. We'd love to have you back. Until then, though, keep doing what you're doing, man. It sounds great. It sounds like you're having a great time doing it too. I love the enthusiasm.
Yeah, it's pretty exciting stuff.
Very cool.
All right, we're going to take a break here on Techstrong. We'll be right back.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Techstrong TV. I am really happy to have two of my friends join us on this next session. They're the co-CEOs at Launchable. And I believe the website is still Launchable Inc., launchableiNC.com, if that's correct. Forgive me if it's incorrect. But let me introduce you, first of all, to my friend KK, Kosuke Kamaguchi, and my friend Harpreet Singh. Together, they've launched Launchable, and it's probably been 2 years now, right?
Getting close to 3, I think.
Almost 3, yeah. Wow.
Well, in COVID time, you lose track. But anyway, Harpreet, KK, welcome. Thank you for coming on.
Hey, thanks for having us.
Thanks.
So neither one of you really need an introduction to our audience, but I'm going to make you do it anyway, if it's okay. KK, why don't you go first, and then we'll come to Harpreet.
Yeah, so I'm probably best known as the guy who created Jenkins. I spent almost a decade at CloudBees. Still very passionate about the developer productivity, and so now I'm trying to do the second startup that's Launchable.
Excellent. Harpreet?
Harpreet, I go back a long way with KK as well. I was VP of products at CloudBees. Then I was at Atlassian for a short while with the Atlassian Bitbucket as the head of product there. And we both got together and said, hey, we need to inflict more pain on ourselves. We'll do another startup. And so here we are.
Absolutely. But, I remember interviewing you both when you announced Launchable, right? So I feel like I've been here since the birth, if you will, of this baby. And, there was a very specific kind of problem that you guys saw with Launchable. You didn't just decide to go do a startup. There was, as often happens with founders, you saw there was a gap, there was a problem, there was an issue, something that had to be done better. And it was around the way we do testing and the way we set up what tests to run, when to run them, how to run them, what we do with the results. That whole area, for as smart as we are with DevOps and CI/CD and all of these things, it was lagging, if you will.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So I don't want to put words in your mouth. Go talk.
Yeah. So let me talk a little bit about that. So, so this is kind of at the convergence point of several line of thoughts that sort of independently happen. So the one is, when I was developing Jenkins, it became, that is a project going on for a good 10 years. So it amassed a lot of tests. And then at the point, the software also got bigger. So every time you're making a small change, and you're always making a small change, even with the big software. Then the big software, a small change, and we're running all the tests every single freaking time. And I had to wait for a whole hour. And then that started to feel like really slowing me down. And I was talking to the other software development teams around the world because of my role. And it turns out that I was on a luckier side if my test is done in an hour. They're talking about tens of hours or multiple days. Now, back in the day when you're only releasing every once a month, it was painful, but it was okay. If you're trying to deploy every, say, 6 hours or every hour, you obviously can't have the test cycle that's taking 24 hours. So clearly that's I see a friction there. And then, so those ideas got combined. I realized, okay, so we were driving lots of automations, and then Jenkins played a key part in that. A lot of software development teams are going through that journey. A lot of them are suffering this test problem and that workload, going way overboard, and they are not really be able to, they are almost at the law. On one hand, the quality, I haven't yet to come across any software developer who feels their quality is adequate. And so they always want to have more tests, but they also need to release faster. So that creates them in a rock and hard place. And somewhat surprisingly, because they feel like it's such an unsexy thing, they don't want to, they don't want to talk about things. They always felt like it's it's because our team sucks. No, everybody has that problem. And then Facebook came out with this paper in which it turned out that they have the problem 100x. And then they apply the machine learning to figure out if you're making a small change, what are the meaningful set of change tests that you can run to verify the quality. So, okay, I have this problem myself. I'm hearing a lot of people who are having that problem. Some even trying to solve them. And these cutting edge companies are already deploying these solutions. So clearly, there's a wide enough problem in the world. So that's what the Launchable set out to solve. And then sort of it grew from there. So it turns out that mostly what we are doing in the software development is actually not smart. You talked about, DevOps is becoming smart. It's actually mostly brute force, right? So there are so many opportunities that the data could improve the process. And then that thinking, for example, you can see it in the manufacturing process, sales and marketing and other departments, but surprisingly missing from the software engineer. So I always felt as one of the engineer leadership that or the ability for us to articulate how our organization is behaving as a whole, where the inefficiencies are, is quite limited. So that's also another thing that the data can do. So it's that's the space that we are in.
There's a picture I want to put in your mind is, we've done that. Every CI/CD company is talking about this infinity loop of continuous delivery. And it looks like once you connect all of that, it's a very seamless process. Like things really move fast and you're pushing things to production and so on and so forth. So one, the data there is not being used. So that's one thing. But the picture actually is that it's not a smooth infinity loop. It's actually, imagine a tire that's letting off air and it's all crumpled up. It's bloated on the testing side. So that's what happens. So people connect and go through the CI/CD process, and often they're on this journey for months, if not years. And then they look back and they say, like, okay, we did all of this to actually go fast. Like, how fast are we? It's not quantifiable. And it is not really fast, because really the biggest bottleneck in there is your tests are taking you a lot of time. And none of the data that is coming out from that exhaust is being used to figure out, like, can we do this smartly? And so that sort of was our insight.
Excellent. Let's fast forward to today, guys. Right? Without, rehashing the last almost 3 years, where are we today in Launchable, you think? Where, progress, what's exciting you now? What are you doing now that, because the problem's still there, obviously, right? I mean, this is entrenched.
Yeah. So one of the things that we recently worked on is what we call these test notifications. Where basically, in some sense, it came out of our own dog fooding of this, the development, like our own practicing of the development process, in which, the people all that the test that they reveal is a programming the code. But they, most of the time today, they only get exposed as like a 1 bit of information, pass or fail, in the pull request. And then when they fail, when it passes, that's fine. Like if tests are passing, there's nothing more to think about. So that's great. But when it fails, there's this next step of the work in which, okay, so what tests have failed, how they failed, and that derives the next set of action for the developers. So we release this software in which we provide that instant feedback. When as soon as the test is over, we tell you where you get those real-time notifications, aka Slack. And then we show you the relevant set of information that can help you get to the action more quickly. And then this tight loop, there is a tight loop that the developer goes through every single day, which is they have a task at hand, they make a code change, and they push it up, and the CI system runs them. And then you correct that mistake until you're happy, and then that gets moved on to the next. The change gets moved on to the next stage, and you work on it. So that is the part of the developer a life cycle you're focused on. That is also a free product that anybody could sign up and use. So we just released that for a month ago or something like that. Yeah. So that's something we are very excited about at the moment.
Right. If we take a step back on our 3-year journey, right? When we kicked off, our vision that we talked to you was we'll build a machine learning platform that consumes data from your tests and your code and start doing something useful. So we launched our first product, which was predictive. And then we wanted to build applications on top of it using that data. So we built our premier product with predictive test selections, which cuts down these runtimes of tests that we were talking about, right? So you can cut down up to, between 40 to 80% is where people are cutting down their test times. So imagine Selenium. And I just wrote a case study, so it's on top of my mind, where a team actually cut down their execution time on Selenium tests by 90%. Right.
Wow.
And then as we were doing this, we found that people actually didn't have a good idea about their tests. So we started talking to organizations. I was just talking to somebody who thought their tests are actually running once a day. And they sent the data over to us, and we found, no, you're actually running this once a month. There's a massive discrepancy between what you think is going on versus what is actually going on.
Reality. Yeah.
Right. So we took that product and we put that into what we call test insights. And then as we were doing this, this conversation kept coming about that devs are sort of getting these notifications very slowly, they are going through CI tools and so on and so forth. And I remember a Stripe report which said devs spent about 35 hours of a 40-hour work week dealing with bad code, right? That's your life. And in that context, with what Kosuke is saying, if the feedback is coming to you slowly, it's like friction. In this, there's always a speed bump. You can never really go fast, and consequently, we built that product for test notifications, and we feel like it's a good enough value for people to just put that in their pipeline. Start moving a little faster, and that's where we are today.
Got it. Harpreet, you mentioned that case study. So the old marketing part, is that available?
Yeah, so you can go to launchableinc.com, and it's on our on the top in customers. If you click there, it's called Radical Reduction Selenium Test Execution Times, and there are a few more there where people are using us, in all sorts of places.
Excellent. It's funny, I, as you both know, I've been involved in the DevOps space now 9, maybe 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
And testing, look, I remember when I first launched DevOps.com, the scuttlebutt was, well, DevOps is going to kill testing, right? QA people, you better find a new job because we're going to just automate it, and it's, the QA function, it's going to go away. Of course, nothing could be further than the truth. But what amazes me is something like Selenium, for instance, is still as dominant as it was, and as it is. I mean, it was dominant then, it's as more dominant now in many ways. Is that in and of itself indicative of we're not making progress? Or is just Selenium a unicorn or whatever?
Well, I mean, this Selenium clearly solves the hard problem, which is one of the fundamental challenge in QA is the observation and manipulation of the target world that they're testing is always hard, like a browser being the primary one. So that is a legitimate hard problem that they tackle and solve well. And then there's always in the tech safety numbers, and it's open source and whatnot. So yeah, it's incredibly sticky technology, and while you can I'm sure you can make incremental improvements, but it's kind of hard to, So I don't think it's like a lack of sign of a progress. It's just, I think of it as almost like Unicode. I'm old enough that when the Unicode came along, it was like a flashy new things. And today nobody thinks about a Unicode, but it's still very much there. The foundation of what we do is just building more stuff on top of it. And so we tend to talk about the stuff that's like a new layer we're building on top of it. But, underneath, we all got the same totem poles here.
I mean, to me, it's akin to Jenkins, right? There are a lot of companies out here who say we built a better mousetrap. Yeah. We have a better CI/CD tool, right? Jenkins is old. Yet, what's the biggest CI/CD tool still in the marketplace? Probably Jenkins, exactly. by much, right? So it is in that. Let's talk about this closing the gap, though, especially in the communications and so forth, that you guys are focusing in on here, right? What's the ultimate aim of it, first of all, right? So, I mean, obviously, on its face, you understand why we do it, why you'd want this done, right?
So, I guess, ultimately the long goal. I think our ultimate goal is every, hydrogen particle go disappear and then the universe dies as slow this. But I think the kind of key milestone or a North Star that I'm thinking about is how can we let our a lower level decision making or information gathering delegated back to the machines in ways that, for example, maybe doctors work with nurses, right? When you go see a doctor, you don't actually get to see a doctor right away. You almost get greeted by the nurses, and they measure you and whatnot, get all the information and ready, and then the doctor storms in, spend 5 minutes with you, and then he moves on because their time is precious, so they divide up the labor. And I feel a lot of what the software developers do today, it's still those fact gathering, the bubble up these relevant information from the ticket and test failures and code changes and whatnot. And then they connect that, then the more intellectual work happens. So some of these a lower level work closer to the data and facts on the ground, that is automatable, I feel. And it's getting harder because the scale of the development is getting larger, automation is getting bigger and whatnot. So occasionally we call that executive admins for every developer, that's the kind of I think the one milestone that's still pretty far in terms of the distance. It's not probably the ultimate destination, but I think it's an important milestone.
Harpreet?
Oh, no, he nailed it. I think, and so I'll sort of lay down the breadcrumbs from the here to the executive assistant, right? When we thought about even this problem, it's when you get into the nitty gritties and the depth of it, and you go nobody solved that. That's really surprising. That just seems like we should be solving it. And so when KK and me were sort of doing Jenkins and CloudBees, that our ethos is let's talk to some customers, see what the problems are, and then tackle the ones that are burning the most. And that resonates with me as a product manager. So what we've done today is solve one of the lowest hanging fruits out there. We're hoping that devs sort of use that and find it useful. We'll find what the next set of challenges on this journey for this executive admin to a developer looks like, and we'll pick that and we'll solve that, right? The data is there in the platform. We can consume that, and we can hopefully show that to you in good ways. You connect to us, and now we have your data. We can say, you thought you're running these once multiple times a day. No, that's something else is happening. Maybe your tests are failing too much. And that sort of drives different behaviors for you, right? And that is data driven. And that has been our vision 101 from, day one. Is how can we use this data and get devs to use that data and, be smarter about what challenges they pick, because their times are really, really valuable.
Excellent. Guys, speaking of time, we're about out of it here. I apologize, but we coming up on top of the hour. I mentioned in the beginning of today, it's launchableinc.com is the website. Harpreet, you had mentioned that some of these case studies and use cases are available right there, right? People should go download and check those out. Guys, it's always a pleasure to have you both on. Always. And come back soon and keep us posted, okay?
Yeah.
It's always a pleasure to be here, Alan.
Our pleasure. Harpreet Singh, Kosuke KK, here from Launchable Inc. on Techstrong TV. We're going to take a break and we'll be right back.
ContainerJournal.com is the leading online destination for centralized computing-related content. ContainerJournal.com covers all aspects of software containers, from container management, data management for containers, container security, networking for containers, to the entire container ecosystem, Kubernetes, microservices, serverless, and more. ContainerJournal.com has the largest selection of container-related news, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.containerjournal.com to learn more.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for tackling IoT in a DevOps world, or tackling secure DevOps in an IoT world, excuse me. My name is Lori LaRusso, and I am with JFrog. I am our open source program manager, and I'm very happy to be moderating our panel today. And so I would love for our guests to introduce themselves, and I'm going to start with Amit Ezer to my left.
Hey, my name is Amit. Thank you for having me here today. I'm managing a group called Connect in JFrog, doing everything that is about IoT, and previously was the co-founder and CEO of Upswift, that was acquired by JFrog a year ago. So happy to be here and looking forward to speak with you.
Thank you. And next, let's go to Jim.
Hey, thanks, Lori. Yeah, my name is Jim Mercer. I'm our research vice president here at IDC. So I focus in the area of DevOps and DevSecOps. So a lot going on there in terms of DevOps and looking at the entire DevOps pipeline, but also how security is a huge impact there, and how organizations are trying to kind of inject application security into their DevOps pipeline. So nice to meet everybody.
Thank you very much. And our next Amit Serper, please.
Hi. So I'm also Amit. So there's twice as much Amit here, which means twice the fun. Just for the sake of clarity, since everyone anyways referred to me by my last name, so just to make it easier, you can just I'll be Serper here in this discussion. I'm the director of security research at a startup company from Israel called Sternum. Personally, I'm based out of the US, and what we do on my team is we look for a lot of vulnerabilities in IoT devices, and we try to make them safer and better with our product. Great to be here with you, and I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much. And last, by no means least, we've got Stephen Chin, who is joining us from the airport in Atlanta.
Hey, so thanks for having me. So I'm the VP of Developer Relations at JFrog. I think being in an IoT panel, there's no place more appropriate to do the IoT session from than being surrounded by, well, a lot of people, but also a lot of IoT devices. So I'm literally in an airport, as you can see, and the plane is outside. So
we love your dedication, and we appreciate you being here right before your flight. This is crazy. Okay, so since we're all here, we're all just getting warmed up, I thought I'd start with a very easy question, very light, and just what gets you excited or interested in IoT? What kind of turned that spark on in your brain? And Stephen, let's just start with you.
So I mean, I've been a huge fan of IoT devices and the Internet of Things for a long time. Both, I think it's something which impacts all of our lives now that we have smart cars and we're heavily reliant upon cell phones and different devices. But even more importantly, it's something which as software developers, we can program, we can control. I think Raspberry Pis really brought industrial IoT devices to the hands of your average developer in a very easy to use, modern Linux-based platform. But similar sorts of custom ARM chips and devices are what power a lot of the different IoT devices running behind the scenes. And I think it's something which we all need to understand the technology, understand the security aspects of it, and this will help us to build better, more maintainable software that powers all of the critical systems which we use day to day.
Awesome. Serper, I saw you nodding. You go next.
Yeah, so with me, excuse me, with me it started, I think over a decade, more than a decade ago, about 13, 14 years ago. I had a router, a Linksys WRT54GL that anybody in my field almost knows it by heart. It was a router that Linksys made where you could, it was based on Linux, and you could load your own custom Linux to it or use third-party distributions like DDWRT or OpenWRT. That's what got me into it from a security perspective. And what got me excited about breaking those devices and finding vulnerabilities in them was that those devices are often the most important device in your network, where if you're talking about a router, all of the traffic goes through it inside the network and outside of it back to the internet. And all of the firewalls and all of the fancy stuff, the fancy security stuff is always behind the router. But if the router is the first thing that touches the internet, you can actually connect to it and maybe find a vulnerability in it, maybe exploit it, maybe do a whole bunch of stuff with it. So that got me into really into like hacking routers and other IoT devices, and I abuse those devices all the time here on my desk, and I have my workbench over there, and I just love it. And just like Stephen says, it's at the end of the day, you can, with Linux, you can control a whole bunch of stuff that's really important and that's around you all the time and is often overlooked. And that's what I really think about this field.
Well, speaking of breaking devices, how about the other Amit?
Cool. My story is a bit different. It's from early from early age. I started to love tech challenges, and at some point I found myself playing with Raspberry Pi, Arduino, and without even knowing how to program, I've just started to tackle these boards and to understand what can I do with them, and then from another aspect of my life, my parents actually running an engineering house, and they just saw the need of taking devices or basically taking products or anything that we can see in the airport to the next level. And they started to hear that from their customers that are coming to them and want to do better devices with a much better software on them. And as someone who loved to tackle tech challenges, I was just there in the right time to learn and explore this world more and more. So that was for me the beginning of Upswift, and then of course being at JFrog, thinking about the whole picture of how you take this amazing world of IoT that we have today and DevOps, and searching for the right connections that as a developer you want to have.
I think this is a great segue into Jim when Amit's talking about segueing between IoT and DevOps. So what got you excited, Jim?
So yeah, actually, I guess back in around 2012 or so, I haven't always been an analyst, right? I was working for a vendor, and we were putting together an IoT monitoring, kind of a mock-up or MVP proposal, for an IoT monitoring solution. And the project didn't really make it to real product at the time, but I found some of the challenges and opportunities to be, really interesting. Of course, today IoT is really kind of matured a bit. And, so some of the things of yesterday back to 2012, some of those concepts, as Stephen was pointing out at the airport, become a reality with more and more devices being connected across industries and in our homes and our wearables. Matter of fact, I'm actually part of a very well-known study called the Framingham Heart Study that has been collecting data, following multiple generations of individuals. And with COVID, it was really difficult to get people physically into the office to collect data. So they've been collecting my health data off of my iWatch, and I have a blood pressure thing. They collect the data off of that. And I haven't been in the office in years there. So it's really kind of cool how it's affecting all of our lives in a bunch of different ways. We all have Alexa and smart devices and smart outlets and smart lights in our home, and we've come to rely on this stuff, and it's really interesting to see how it's going to grow. And I think, in terms of IoT use cases, we're really just kind of scratching the surface on that now.
Well, I think you bring up a really interesting topic and point. Like, you are working on a study, and a challenge that you face is that you haven't been able to actually go in and check in. So you're using your watch, you're using your heart rate monitor, you're doing all of this stuff virtually. So Amit, I would like to ask you, what do you see as one of the biggest challenges facing IoT right now? Like, this was a nice example of one that is solved by our smartwatches. But what do you see as facing the industry?
Yeah. So this is, I'm speaking with companies that produce products and IoT devices almost every day, and most of the guys that I'm speaking with are between, I will say, developers to product engineers to IoT geeks that trying to find themselves in this world, in this market, and the most common question that always come to the conversation is about best practices. We're speaking about where the cloud is and the amazing tools that we have out there, if it's Kubernetes or Ansible or so many great automations capabilities that can save you a lot of time. And then when it comes to IoT, the word DevOps is actually a bit strange, right? I mean, how can you really deploy devices? How can you really supervise your fleet of devices? So I think the biggest challenge today in our world is actually having good, useful best practices for those developers that have this amazing job of deploying and supervising their devices that are getting smarter, right? You can't control it anymore. It's gonna stay like that, and we're gonna see more and more complex software running in the edge. So I think this is one of the biggest challenges, having the best content out there for those developers to help them do their job easily without having them inventing the word of DevOps for their use case. So this is just a perspective that I see it every day speaking with developers. It's just amazing how we just started. We just started, right? Thinking about this market.
So Steve, since you wrote a book on Raspberry Pis and I would assume have some best practices listed in that, what do you feel is something that is a challenge in addition to this?
Yeah, so when I
Steve, I think you went on mute.
sorry. So I think when you look at all the different devices which we have to support, there's such a wide variety of platforms and devices and things which you need to be able to deploy to, you need to be able to get internet connectivity to, you need to be able to update. And part of the challenge in IoT is that wide diversity of devices, right? So when you're doing DevOps and you're deploying to systems in on the cloud or in hosted solutions, you have a lot more control and uniformity over the systems and the types of things which you're doing software updates and software delivery to. When you're doing deployments to devices in the field with different chipsets, different manufacturers, different capabilities on them, the variation in devices you need to support is really challenging. And I think the other thing which strikes people when they first start working on large scale IoT deployments is, it's a hard problem to deploy to and to support hundreds or thousands of servers in a Kubernetes large scale deployment. But IoT takes it to the next level, where every single device behaves like a server that you need to maintain, you need to update, you need to be deploying to, and it just scales it to the tens of thousands or more in terms of devices you need to support. And at that scale, there's no way to do it without the right automation, without the right security practices. And you have to start from the beginning with a DevOps automation mindset.
I think that one of the things you just kind of touched on, Stephen, was security, in that you want to make sure that what you are deploying to all of your devices is secure. So, Serper, you are our security guy, so I'd kind of like to ask you, what are some of the biggest security risks you see today that could affect IoT devices and deployments?
Well, the devices themselves. There's a project that we're working on my team right now. It's a consumer device that's being sold in the stores right now. We're in year 2022, almost 2023. And there are on that device, there are libraries and code that haven't been updated since the beginning of last decade, I want to say. So I think that if we're connecting back to what Stephen says with supporting those devices at scale and making sure that they all run and have connectivity and updates and all of those things, that is a big challenge on its own. But then when you have all of those devices connected to the internet and they're running a bunch of really, really outdated code from 2008 or Linux kernels from when I was back in high school, and I'll be turning 36 soon, so you can do the math. I think that this is the problem, because if we're always talking about IoT security as if it's something that exists, and it doesn't, because if we're comparing it to our computer, like the computer that I'm talking to you right now, is getting, I use Linux, I get updates every morning. I wake up and I have a bunch of updates to install. On the other hand, I have a bunch of IoT devices around me that I'm using them all the time. They're on all the time. And not only that they're not getting any updates, they will never get any updates. So I think that, and for a company like us, like Sternum, our challenge, the problem that we want to solve is to make sure that those devices are always protected, even if there will never be a patch for them. So when I look at IoT in general as a field, it's cool and I love it and I'm very committed to it. And I have an exploit tattoo on my arm for IoT. I'm very committed to it, but I'm also very aware of how fragile it is and how much of a way we have to traverse and go through until we will be able to achieve some sort of parity of security between our regular computers and our IoT devices.
So I think this is super interesting. And Jim, I'd like to hear your take on it, since Serper is turning the ripe old age of 36, and you've been doing this for a little bit longer. What have you seen in terms of the evolution of IoT? And, are we still using the devices that you were working on back in the day? What do you think has been the biggest advancement in the field? And, how can you address some of Serper's concerns?
Yeah, well, first, I'm only 35, to be clear. Yeah, I mean, I think it's really, really interesting. Certainly devices have changed, availability of devices changed. I think 5G's had something to do with that as well in terms of acceptability of devices. But what I found really interesting about what when Serper was talking about, security, because it's not just the security of the software or the device. There's that physical level of security too, right? You held up a device where it looked like you've been snipping some wires or something. And Serper, yeah, I don't know what he's doing over there, right? But there's the physical aspect, and it feels like maybe it's a little bit like some of the challenges we face with mobile security to an extent, right? Do we need code obfuscation? Should we, what should we do with encryption? Are there man-in-the-middle type of attacks we should be concerned about? How am I protecting my data? How do I know I can even trust the device that I'm sending an update to, right? I don't know. How can I trust that? Is a bad actor impersonating a device to gain access, to my supply chain? How exposed again physically is that device? I'll probably need some level of thinking about my network and network segmentation to make sure that I'm, segmenting, different parts of my IoT network, so there's no front door, if you will, to maybe other networks or my corporate network. It's crazy. And when you think about it, IoT devices aren't stationary devices, right? We just saw you pick one up there, right? we could be pushing software to devices on trucks or cars. When's an appropriate time for me to push that software out? So I think that there's so many things going on here, and I think a point that somebody made before, I think maybe it was Amit, about best practices, I think is huge here, because I think one of the challenges around IoT, to me, as I look at it, is when you talk about IoT, usually the response is, well, it depends, right? It depends upon the devices, depends upon the architecture, depends upon the software, it depends upon the use case, right there. So it's really hard for that standardization, and I think that's really, I think we're still lacking that, right? That level of standardization in IoT, and how we can actually say, this is the way you deploy software to an IoT device. Maybe it needs to be broken down by domain or device types or something along those lines. But there needs to be, and conversations like this, I think, are helpful, right? There needs to be more work collaboratively, across the community to kind of make all that happen.
And I think to your point, right? Like, you can't bring all devices in to get updated, right? You can't bring a device in to make sure your hardware is up and running in the right way. So Stephen, I want to ask you, like, what is a way to deploy software knowing that it's secure, even though your device might not be?
Yeah, so I think that it's like deploying secure software to devices is tricky, and like I think I totally agree with what my fellow panelists have said, but there's kind of two aspects to it. So that one is the desire of the person who's supplying the software or the firmware or like what's running on device to make sure that it's up to date. And the second part is the willingness of the user or the person who's applying the device to actually publish and to make those devices those updates to deploy those updates to the device. And I think we've seen a big change in terms of our behavior as consumers in this. So if you remember the days where we would be asked to update our device, and you could choose if you wanted to update or you didn't want to update it, and usually the right choice was not to update, because if you updated, there was no guarantee that your laptop, your mobile phone, whatever it was, would actually finish the update successfully. And there's still to this day are classic failures in updates of laptops and other devices. When you take this at IoT scale, it exacerbates the same problem, and the question is, what's the risk of pushing and deploying a new update to device? And one of the critical strategies which we can learn from server deployments, and should just be a standard on all IoT device deployments, is automatic rollbacks. So if you're pushing to an IoT device in the field or somewhere which is inaccessible, having a failed update or an update which bricks the device is unacceptable. That's complete failure of the system. So designing systems with automatic rollbacks and making sure that when you push an update, it will seamlessly fall back to the last known working version of the firmware or the operating system. Or having an entire Linux container, Docker container image you can fall back on is the ideal way of doing these sort of deployments. And it takes best practices from server side deployments and Kubernetes, and then applies it to IoT and devices at the edge.
So speaking of like a rollback, we do have a bit of a of a celebrity on here. And while the audience starts putting in their questions, so yes, audience, please type in the questions. This panel is going to be more interesting if the questions that you want answered are asked, and I'm happy to ask them for you. But Serper, can you just tell us a little bit about what you discovered or what you worked on in 2017?
Oh, so I'm the celebrity. Wow. Well, my apologies. Yeah, I think you're probably referring to NotPetya. Yeah, so if I can tie NotPetya loosely to the topic that we're discussing here, so Just a quick refresher: in summer of 2017, Russia unleashed a devastating ransomware attack on Ukraine, which then propagated out of Ukraine throughout the rest of the world, and started encrypting and rendering machines useless all over the world in hours. I just happened to be in the right place at the right time, or at the wrong place at the wrong time. That depends on how you look at it. I found a way to stop this malware, or not stop it, but rather cause it not to run if it gets to your machine. Almost like I called it a vaccine, which is a similar approach to what we're doing at Sternum with our product. And what was interesting about NotPetya, other than the ransomware part of it, which was actually not really interesting, it was the fact that it was a supply chain attack. It was the fact that the threat group that was behind this attack, nicknamed Sandworm. By the way, there's a really good book called Sandworm by Andy Greenberg that discusses this attack and incident very thoroughly. I strongly recommend it. And what happened was that the threat actors breached a company in Ukraine that makes an accounting software, almost like QuickBooks, if I have to compare it to the States. And they have planted a malicious update in the code of that accounting software, and that got pushed pretty much to every computer that does business in Ukraine or with Ukraine, because they all had to have this accounting software. And that's how the ransomware started to propagate all over the world. And it was very interesting to see a supply chain attack in real time, and how it affects so many computers and so many, like it affected actual lives. Maersk, the gigantic shipping company, stopped working because of that. They had container ships all over the world that couldn't do business. It was kind of crazy. And I just happened to be with my laptop visiting my parents in Israel, and as they were just talking about it over the news, I got a sample of the malware and I started reverse engineering it. And while a lot of other people I was talking to at the same time, they were dealing with the cryptography aspect of it. How can we decrypt the files that were encrypted and so on? Since I'm not a crypto guy and I'm pretty bad with math in general, I just started to look at the code and see what happens, like what causes the program, being the ransomware, what causes it to terminate itself. And then I found that it checks for the existence of a specific file in a specific path, and if you put that file in that specific path, if the malware will ever get to your machine, it'll see that the file is there and it will simply not run. By the way, only after I read that book that I mentioned, Sandworm, I discovered that this was a mechanism that was put there by the attackers on purpose, so that they could still have access to systems that they don't want to nuke off the face of the earth. So that was an interesting thing. But finding out the solution to this really big problem, other than my personal benefit of it made me internet famous for 5 minutes. It really demonstrated the importance of having your supply chain, if I can use that term, having it safe and secure. Because by breaching one company, literally the entire world was affected. So if I'm taking this incident and I'm casting it onto this discussion that we have here, and circling back to the example I gave a few minutes ago, when we have devices that are all over, and they could be smart outlet, they could be wearables, they could be electric meters, they could be whatever. If they're running outdated code, or if their supply chain is not secure, then I think that NotPetya is sort of like the harbinger of what's to come. But that is my very pessimistic outlook, and I'm sorry to rain down on people's parades.
I don't know if that's pessimistic, realistic, or just like a warning.
Masochistic, maybe.
But Amit, you had something to add to Steven's automatic rollback comment.
Yeah, well, It's just speaking, and then I think Jim mentioned it as well, and I started to speak about it in the beginning, and when you're looking on the whole aspect of an update to deployment to edge devices, if they are small or big, or if they have a good communication, network communication, or not so, and pretty unstable, rollback is really the thing that could save you. But adding to that, and I think as Jim started to say, that we need to communicate more about IoT best practices in the DevOps world. So I think this is a good start by saying that device provisioning is another layer, or maybe a kind of a common ground to begin with when you deploy updates, right? Because having a good rollback is a very important thing, and having a good system with flexibility of deployment options and features is so important. But it's all starting somewhere down the line, where your device is supervised, where you feel that you can always reach the device. It doesn't matter where the device. It doesn't matter if the device is running is communicating through cellular modem on on a low bandwidth 3G modem, or Wi-Fi on the mall. It will always act as a client side, speaking with the cloud, helping you reaching everything that you need in order to do your job well. And I think it's by the way, another good connection to the security world for IoT devices, because again, this is just the first layer of everything that we would like to achieve on our IoT devices. And looking on the last 5 or 4 years, on the biggest providers on the cloud, if it's AWS or GCP or Azure, they all give you this basic feeling, confident that your instance, your server is always here, and you can always touch everything that you need. And this is something that is kind of not there yet when we are speaking about IoT, and can give us the ground to build the other Lego blocks that are missing in this area.
Speaking of like Lego blocks and building in this area, what do you all, and I'm just going to throw this out to the panel, but what do you think is going to be the next wave of tech that impacts IoT, right? So we already have been talking about the issue of supply chain attacks. And if you have an update and it goes to 10,000, 2 million, 12 million devices, like, what do you do, right? What kind of security stuff can you put in place before it gets deployed? And then what can you do after it's deployed to like kind of, fix or mediate the issue? So whoever wants to kind of go first, but what do you think will be like kind of like the next wave?
I was going to say, Lori, there's a lot happening on the hardware side, and I'll admit I'm not an expert on the hardware stuff. I do have a Raspberry Pi in my drawer somewhere, but there's I think one of the interesting things about IoT is hardware. It was almost like hardware wasn't relevant for a while there in the cloud, right? We were saying everything software. Hardware is becoming relevant again. So there's certainly a lot, I think, going on there with smaller, more accessible, more resilient devices that's happening. I think on the software side, we talked a fair amount about best practices and standardization, and those are all compelling needs, and there's some really interesting things going on there between just even between hearing what's going on with Amit and Serper, that's his alias. His real name is Amit, right? I'm changing my name to Amit, by the way. But on the software side, it feels like maybe things like WASM, I think, is kind of interesting. How that might be able to provide some interesting capabilities for IoT, and the edge. Kind of reduces potentially the size of the binaries, right? Can help perhaps with some compatibility issues, security. And I think things like that can really open things up. I also think we talked a little bit about the community. I think oftentimes some of the coolest innovation tends to come out of our open source community. So I wouldn't be surprised if there's more innovation out there that's coming to the forefront that eventually will come out through the open source community and then be commercialized and so forth. So I think there's just a lot of exciting things happening.
And when you talk about hardware too, there's the actual supply chain issue in getting the hardware, getting the chips, and the US is now investing in trying to get more factories to build more chips. Who else would like to kind of jump in on this one?
On the supply chain aspect, or I'm sorry?
On just like kind of what the next wave that's going to hit IoT.
I think that throughout the last few years, there has been, and finally, I feel like finally, how can I say it? The shoe dropped, and people understand that. And again, it connects perfectly to what I said in the beginning about routers. Like that IoT devices are also important, and they should also get the attention of security people, and not just the regular computers and servers in the organization. And I think that we're already seeing, first of all, we're seeing much more, we're seeing a lot more companies and technologies that they exist solely to protect IoT devices. So it's not only like a spin-off of another security product that has been loosely adjusted to support IoT devices. We have those things too, and they're not that great. I'm talking about companies like us and like other companies that they only exist to secure IoT devices. And to me, as a security researcher and someone who cares a lot about security and everything that I buy, even to my own personal use, I first thing that I do is I look at it as a security researcher and as a hacker. I think that we're going to see a lot more attacks on IoT devices. We're already seeing them, but I think it's going to grow even more. And to counter that, we're going to see a lot more technology companies trying to mitigate that risk and make sure that the software supply chain is intact, the hardware supply chain is intact, that updates are being pushed properly or at all. And if they're not being pushed, there are technologies such as ours to help with that problem. So I think that it's going to really shift and move the market to a more to that area. Or so I hope, because that's my job security.
And Steve, what do you think?
Yeah, so just to add to what Jim and Serper said. So I think that one of the fundamental changes, if you look at how we're applying and using IoT devices, is it's not just that they're all connected to the internet. It's that to Serper's example of a router, often when you're putting IoT devices, 5G devices, or even a lot of the home automation, everything is exposed individually to the internet. And this just exponentially increases the attack surface of the entire IoT deployments. And to Jim's point about open source, I think if you look at some of the innovations happening at a fundamental level in the open source community, they're really trying to change the landscape of security in a positive way. And one of the examples of this is memory safe languages. Rust is the most commonly used language for WASM. It's designed for memory safety from the get-go, and like having languages which make it hard to get buffer overflows and commonly exploitable security issues makes makes it easier to secure a device. It doesn't make the devices secure, but it reduces the number of potential attacks against devices. And other projects like the Persia project, so that's the t-shirt I'm wearing, are also trying to secure the open source supply chain by creating more secure distribution channels for open source projects to publish and make their software available securely. Because as we all know, the majority of enterprise and IoT devices are composed of open source software. You're running Linux, you're using open source dependencies, and the amount of code you're actually writing for the device is dwarfed by all these open source dependencies you're pulling in. So if they have security issues, your device has security issues, regardless of how tight your own corporate security practices are on software development. So I think if I had to pick where things are going, I would say that it's more and faster and internet connected devices, but with a higher focus on security and continuous updates to those devices to keep them secure.
So Amit, we are kind of coming short on time, so I'm going to let you kind of have the last little piece of this question. And then if anybody has anything they want to follow up with, we've got just a few more minutes.
Right. So, well, I mean, I'm thinking about myself 4 or 5 years ago, looking on IoT stuff and looking what I can run on boards for makers even, and looking today on customers that I'm working with and the things that they are doing and the number of deployments, updates that are taking to the edge every week or every day, made me think from this perspective that the software is on the edge going to be complicated from day to day, to the point where we're going to see companies producing products that are getting updates every day in the background without everyone knowing about that. And if you think about it for a moment, I think we can all agree that they all going to be extremely depend on the ability to drop this software on their devices. And I think we're going to see more and more companies getting to this field, helping from the community to startups, getting to this area, helping them provide the next solution to really solve this area.
Well, and you know what they say, every software company since COVID every company is now a software company, right? You know, how many apps are on your phone? So it's not just the phone, it's the apps and it's all of that. So we are running out of time. So I would love to thank all of you for participating today. Amit, Serper, Stephen, Jim, I think this was a great panel to hear all of your different viewpoints. All of you come at things with a very different eye, and I think it was a great conversation. I hope we can have another conversation in the future. So I'd like to thank Techstrong TV and the DevOps Experience Conference for letting us talk with you today. And I hope everyone enjoyed the conversation. And yeah, this is just part one because things are changing. So thank you, everybody, and have a good afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great.
DevOps.com is the #1 online destination for DevOps education and community building. DevOps.com covers all aspects of DevOps, including DevOps best practices and tools, DevOps culture, DevSecOps, business impact, continuous testing, continuous delivery, and more. DevOps.com has the largest collection of original DevOps content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.devops.com to learn more. DevOps.com, where the world meets DevOps.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hey, welcome back. Mitch Ashley. We are here at AWS reInvent Las Vegas 2022 and at the Techstrong Studios at the Wynn, doing many great interviews. And it's been a fantastic day, and we've got another great person lined up here. I'm joined by David Klein, who is CMO with Kentic. Welcome.
Howdy, how's it going?
Good, good. Tell us a little bit about yourself and tell us a little bit about Kentic.
I didn't know I was going to get personal questions on here, but that's fair.
But no, there's no background check. Don't worry, you're good.
I'm just kidding. I'm CMO at Kentic. I love the concept and space of observability. I most recently was running marketing for Lightstep, which was acquired by ServiceNow, and application observability, of course, and a wonderful product and team. I joined Kentic about 6 months ago, and it's been absolutely fantastic.
Very cool. Well, we were talking before about have a little bit of background in the network space, and it's so interesting how so many things have converged now. Observability's been hot. You talk about Lightstep and your background in that industry, part of our industry, and now we're bringing observability to network observability. As you would describe it to someone, how would you describe what that means?
Sure. No, great question. So network observability is a way to answer any question about your network quickly. And that's a question that could be around a business outcome. It could be around user experience. It could be security, policy, compliance, but it's the ability to answer any question whatsoever. And what's particularly novel about that for the network is, I'm sure you know, and I'm sure many of your audience knows, the network has changed dramatically over the course of even the last few years. And not that the routers and switches have gone away, they are still there, but it's so much broader. There are data centers, there are containers, there's cloud, there's multi-cloud, there's how the internet itself impacts performance for users and for customers. And we're able to collect telemetry from pretty much anything and provide visibility into what's going on in the network. Not just we, but that's the concept of network observability.
What do you think about old enough to say this? In the old days, it was the MIB, and that was like our only window into what was really happening, other than maybe alerts that are being generated. And you think about today in software-defined networking, we virtualize so many components of the network, so there may be still routers and firewalls and things, but they may also be load balancers that are software and firewalls that are all software. And the great thing about software is we can either intelligently put telemetry data that they create, or we need to sift through the things that aren't that helpful, right? In understanding what's going on.
And that's what's so fascinating too about network observability right now is everyone is on a different journey. You have so many organizations that are migrating to the cloud or shifting to multi-cloud or have hybrid networks, and they're trying to make sense of physical infrastructure and virtual infrastructure. And there are different teams with different levels of experience and acumen for these different sort of systems. And you have some certain types of people who are just really about physical infrastructure and understand that and don't really understand how the cloud works. And of course, you have the opposite with cloud engineers and cloud architects. And it's network observability is important because it levels the playing field and provides answers and insights and information that teams need, regardless of who you are. There's a lot of sort of legacy NPM or network performance monitoring technology, and we don't go into that. But the sort of old way is that all these teams are siloed. All the data is siloed, and you can maybe pull something off a router or a data center, or maybe you have some visibility into your Kubernetes infrastructure, and maybe you can see what needs to be orchestrated across these different kind of cloud platforms. But network observability combines all that in one system together, so you can finally ask those questions, and that's ultimately the goal: to know what's going on, so you can deliver a much better experience for customers and for users.
Not a great secret, but we've done, I think, some yeoman's work in trying to break down the silos.
Yeah.
It could be network didn't talk to security, who didn't talk to development, who didn't talk to ops, right? And now through observability, network observability, it isn't just about the quote unquote network, the elements that are part of the network, whether it be software or hardware, but it's also how it gets into the software infrastructure stack. You talked about Kubernetes, or maybe into customer experience information telemetry. That's about an API call in an application that's, of course, going across our network or other people's network.
And that kind of brings a very interesting question, which is, what is the network? I would argue that Kubernetes is the network. Like you could say, yes, that I could see it being argued the other way, but I like to think of it as part of the network, because if you're trying to decide if something breaks or something is late and you have an issue with something, and one of the first questions is this my fault? Is this my team's fault? Do we need to deal with this? And oftentimes that question is it the network? And if it's not the actual application, then you're looking at every other possible component of the infrastructure. Kubernetes is part of that, and I think it's really helpful to be able to provide insights into the health and performance of course, Kubernetes clusters and way beyond, and where that data is going in context of the network. So, our pods, where are pods sending traffic? Are they sending traffic to parts of the network or internet they shouldn't be touching because that's out of compliance with the policy? That all sits in the broader observability spectrum in my mind.
Well, it's interesting because it isn't just a payload that's being wrapped into packets, right? And we don't really care what the payload is, whether it's encrypted or not. Now the network might be API calls, right? You're talking about, service mesh and microservices in a Kubernetes world. That's the network.
Yeah.
Talking within those clusters.
And that's what's so fascinating. As the network has evolved, the people supporting the network has evolved, and the entire makeup of the software that's required to support this architecture and these systems have evolved. And it's a really fun place to be because things are moving so quickly. I think we've kind of crossed that threshold where there was maybe we'll migrate to the cloud or we'll think about it, and we've reached a really interesting space where organizations, enterprise organizations, and some that are maybe viewed as more conservative than others have really done a great job moving forward into the cloud and making really good business decisions around creating great experiences for their customers and for their engineering teams to move more quickly. Because again, the concept of observability, yes, you want to have great business outcomes, and yes, you want to make sure you have an excellent customer experience. But originally back in the day when DevOps was kind of created, and there was this sort of decoupling with microservices, that the purpose was so teams can move faster, right? So dev teams could develop software and innovate faster, and so with observability, you can get that confidence that, okay, we're going to be able to execute on our roadmap and innovate faster than our competitors and deliver really excellent results, because we know that if something breaks, we'll be able to fix it quickly, or we'll even have this sort of proactive technology in place to stop something before it breaks. And applying that sort of application mindset to the network is really cool and really fun.
It's interesting because, and think about kind of old school for a moment, it was about network inventory. What are the devices? How are they all configured? We now live in a world where all of that can change dynamically, right? I mean, we may not know it. Maybe interfaces to our other third parties, maybe a deployment coming out of different dev teams. In a way, that's got to be unsettling if we're used to having a fixed thing that we're monitoring, right? And waiting for red, blue, clean.
I was about to say red and green. I was about to say. Yeah, that's very different modality.
Yellow, okay. And those. That's grows oversimplification, so I don't want to offend anybody, but it was largely driven by alerts and status. And now it's also driven by, well, what does it look like right now, and what did it look like when we need to go back? Because some things are ephemeral, like serverless applications, right?
Absolutely.
So it's, in one way, what I'm trying to say, David, is it can be unsettling, but it also can be comforting now knowing I've got a way to understand what's happening and what the environment looks like.
I completely agree. And but that unsettling part, doesn't go away in that, if you see all of a sudden a traffic spike in a region, perfect scenario, great. We have a lot of users doing something, but it could be a DDoS attack, right? I mean, I think running a modern network, optimizing a modern network, modern infrastructure is a really hard job, because there's so many things that can go wrong at any moment. And even in the perfect scenario, things sometimes feel like they're held together by, duct tape and glue and shoestring. And that's it. And it's just, so important to give the confidence to the teams to know that they're able to answer any questions that they need, to ingest any type of telemetry possible so they can then answer those questions. And it's really cool to be able to see the different teams come together and have conversations with, okay, here's a network engineer, here's an infrastructure engineer, here's a cloud architect, here's an SRE, and everyone having access to the same data set and be able to get insights and the answers they need at once, rather than the previous world where everyone is in a different place, pointing fingers at each other. No one knows even if it's the network or not. And that just takes a lot of cycles and time, and it's not fun for anyone, and it doesn't get at the heart of what anyone's trying to do, which is build great products and deliver great experiences for customers.
One of the things I sense in you about the excitement, if I kind of put myself in your shoes, if I could, for a moment, coming out of Lightstep and observability in that environment, knowing the people that are involved in that and their contributions to helping with open telemetry and open tracing and
Yeah.
some of the origins things that are contributing to the whole movement around observability. I would imagine, I don't mean this to be a softball question. If I'm in
I
your
love
shoes,
softball questions.
if I'm in your shoes, I'm gonna like, I'm excited because I know a lot of shit about what we can do here and what I can bring to the network world.
I mean, my
Am I on track
my
here?
knowledge is so limited compared to the Lightstep product and engineering team. It's like it's borderline ignorant would be the word.
But you
I mean,
know the
but I
difference can mean to customers.
I do. I understand. I mean, my eyes were open just looking at just getting an understanding originally of microservices and the ability for something like distributed tracing, right, to cross those service boundaries and really identify dependencies, far down the stack you might not even see. And a kind of light bulb went off in my head that there are these unknown unknowns out there, and there's very few ways to actually connect the dots and solve something quickly. And when I first learned about Kentic and kind of got a deep dive into what they were doing from the network perspective, it was a very similar realization that there are all these disparate parts of the network. They're evolving at different rates, have different use cases, different people engaging with them. And there's such an unbelievably diverse amount of types of telemetry that needs to be then collected and ingested at scale and put into some sort of adding business context, adding context for the devices, adding context for the different use cases. And that's really interesting to me because the problem is really hard. And I think hard problems are fun. So maybe there's something wrong with maybe this softball question is turning into like a deep psychological analysis of myself.
We could start a show on that. No,
yeah. How much do I owe you an hour for this interview? I feel like
the first hour is free. We'll have to work on it right
okay.
now. I'm the least qualified to help you for sure. So we need to wrap up our time. It's been great talking with you about it. Where can folks find out more about Kentic and the cool work that you all are doing in network observability?
So there's this thing called the internet. No, sorry. But I go to kentic.com. That's KENTIK.com. You can take a look at a variety of solutions we have and use cases for on-prem to container to multi-cloud. And of course, send us a note on there. We're happy to chat.
Great. There you go. Your ticket to AWS reInvent was worth it. You just answered, got a whole source for new answers to your questions. So thank you, David. David Klein, CMO with Kentic.
Appreciate it
for joining us today.
Thanks.
We will be back. We're here today. We have some more interviews. We've got some more tomorrow. So hang tight. We'll be back in just a little bit.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hey, welcome. Great, good to be here at AWS reInvent in Las Vegas 2022. And we're at the Techstrong studio in the Wynn in our special suite where we're interviewing and having great conversations with folks and research meetings and all kind of good things. Speaking of which, our next guest, this is Nick Van Wiggeren, who is VP of Engineering with PlanetScale. Welcome, Nick.
Thank you for having me. I always appreciate you taking the time out. It's always a blast.
It's good to be talking with you. I love talking about database stuff. So we're going to jump into that. But tell people about yourself and PlanetScale.
Yeah, so like you said, my name is Nick Van Wiggeren. I am the VP of Engineering here at PlanetScale. And what we are is a serverless, MySQL compatible database built on top of some CNCF open source technology like Vitesse. So it's a managed service. We run the database for you. They're designed to be used with serverless applications and kind of at what we call outrageous scale. Things that only the biggest companies can dream of reaching.
Interesting. Well, and serverless brings up a whole different class of applications and things. It's more than just, it's not there and then it is when you need it and it goes away. That's true. But talk about what kind of applications are people using serverless for and getting the advantages from it.
That's a great question. So when we say serverless, it can be kind of a misnomer. It runs on servers. They still exist.
Really? Yeah, they're still there.
Yeah, we haven't been able to get rid of those yet. But the idea is, the serverless kind of mindset is applications that can scale down to zero or applications that can scale all the way up to near infinity. So what you see people doing is hitting things like connection limits or cold start problems or things like that. So we really built PlanetScale not just to not run on servers. We built it to run on servers, but to empower developers who are using new serverless technologies like Lambda and scaling their workflow out. We saw existing databases kind of couldn't keep up, and so we built PlanetScale to kind of help them out and give them the tools they need.
Interesting. So what about traditional databases couldn't keep up? Is it the time to build up the cache and load data into, answering whatever query is going to be coming and query optimization, or what are some of the challenges that are traditional?
Yeah.
SQL database is not going to quite be up to snuff with?
Great question. So I think the biggest one that people run into is just connection limits. You know, if you've got every Lambda is a new connection and you say you can go from 100 to 1,000 to 10,000 Lambdas in a couple minutes, well, a lot of databases don't handle 10,000 connections well. So we actually just had a blog post where we put a planet scale database through 1 million concurrent connections, all kind of running queries. And so little things like that, or, you know, you have a database now, it needs more resources. You got to go maybe create a new one, copy the data over, fail over, resize, and you know, that's kind of costly, expensive. But at planet scale, we just go, okay, you need more resources, no problem. Click a button, let the cloud do the rest, and all of a sudden you've got double the resources. So it's just kind of helping that zero to scale, helping people just not think about the limitations of traditional databases.
Interesting. If you don't mind me asking, what kind of things did you have to do to be able to cut that connection time down and still have security and all the things you need to have? Right?
That's a great question. So we actually just released a few months ago a native JavaScript driver for PlanetScale, and that actually took quite a bit of engineering work. So traditionally, right, you make a MySQL connection, it's a brand new connection, you initiate, you've got to do the round trip, the back and forth, and then it's a stateful kind of TCP connection, heavyweight. So we actually built a brand new kind of custom edge load balancer that lets us do the querying over HTTP. So you can use, you know, a worker, you can use a system that doesn't have arbitrary TCP connections, super fast cold starts and things like that, because it all just happens over the web. So we've actually gone in and we said, okay, you know, again, what's the use case? What are people trying to do? They're trying to deploy Dino, they're trying to deploy all these edge JavaScript functions. Where are they getting held up? They're getting held up with cold starts with connection limits, so still uses TLS, so it's still secure no matter kind of where it goes, but it's also performant. You can send a query and an HTTP request without having to do all the back and forth and kind of connection nonsense.
Really taking that part of it out of the application infrastructure stack and putting it into your code, if you will.
Yeah, you know, before we had people kind of running proxies in their local infrastructure. They'd connect the Lambda to the proxy to the database, and we said, look, you know, we can do it better, not because we're super skilled, but we've already got the database. We'll just put the load balancer in front of it and kind of handle it for you. And that's just, again, that's part of that, like kind of getting into the guts of what is serverless, what are people really trying to do, and then giving them a better alternative to what exists now.
What do you think is probably, what's the most misunderstood thing about serverless, other than there is actually a server there?
Well, you know, I think people misunderstand why it's an advantage and how to use it well. So I see this a lot. People talk about the cloud, they talk about serverless, and you say, oh, it's more expensive than running my on-prem, it's more expensive than using EC2. If you use it right, the idea that you can scale up to infinity, you can scale down to zero, you can get stuff shipped and deployed really quickly, there's no kind of capacity bursting you have to do to get a new release out. If you orient your business, if you orient your dev team around what serverless means, you can increase your velocity, you can increase your time to delivery super fast. But if you just copy over the way that you've written software before and try to shoehorn it into a serverless model, yeah, it's going to look the same, and it might just be more expensive. So I think to really get through it, and why we talk about serverless, even though it's not serverless, is it's a mindset, it's a deployment strategy, it's a kind of tenant, a set of core values that if you kind of adhere to, then you get the advantage of serverless.
Yeah, it's interesting because we oftentimes bring our current metaphor or mindset or model of how we construct software or think about the architecture of things. Sometimes that's transferable. Sometimes parts of it are. Sometimes
100%.
Some things you just have to totally rethink.
Yeah.
And I think that's a little bit about serverless.
Totally. Like, you know, you still do CI/CD and stuff like that in the serverless world, but the way that you do deploys in CI/CD, for example, you want to do it right. You've got to rethink what's the paradigm in my Lambda, what's the paradigm in AWS, and you can't just shoehorn your old practices to that, or you'll end up with kind of two problems instead of one.
Yeah, some big container you don't need, right?
Yeah, huge container. You're shipping these whole, you know, and then you're like, wait a minute, isn't this just a VM? And yeah, it is.
Yeah.
You know, then so you got to get away from that a little bit.
Well, and isn't the edge a great place also for serverless? And given the distribution of the edge and where you want to bring up, you know, instances of that, or the fewer or larger number of them, you want to be able to do that anywhere. And now you've got really truly dynamic infrastructure.
I mean, you know, the last 5 years or so, the amount that we've been able to give people, the tooling that the cloud has given people, you can get an application running in 25 different data centers around the world with the click of a single button. I mean, when I first started out, that was a dream. You know, you'd be out there buying servers in all these different data centers and figuring out the network. Nope, click a button, you know, click some check boxes, and you have a global application. It's pretty stunning, honestly. Sometimes I think how lucky we are, in the last few years.
Yeah, I don't know if you see this as a good use case. One of the descriptions I use is someday electric cars will be everywhere. We'll have them, et cetera. But today, people don't realize the amount of data that's transferred up and down, right? When you get home and plug in, it's talking to the network. You're talking about gigs, sometimes terabytes of data going both ways. And imagine if we had all that infrastructure set up everywhere,
100%.
all the time for whenever I'm, getting to the hotel versus getting home
100%.
versus visit the folks, and I plug in somewhere. That's a great application for serverless because I can turn it up, get the data, do the analytics, download whatever I need to download to be done.
Well, we're at the Win, right? And every one of these rooms has an Amazon Alexa in it, right?
Uh-oh. You're going to fire one off, but okay, yeah.
But you think about it, right? Every day you've got people checking in, checking out. Think of how many Alexas, think of how many calls that is. You couldn't plan for scale for that.
Mm-hmm.
The 60,000 people coming here for reInvent, you can't capacity plan. Serverless lets you just say, okay, we match the paradigm, we match the model. Sure, everyone can ask Alexa to open the blinds all of a sudden, and no sweat, no problem. That's what serverless allows you to do.
And anywhere. So talk about reInvent and kind of what's happening for you here.
Yeah, so we didn't have a booth last year. We've got a booth this year, so we've been kind of hanging out there, talking to people, and it's just been really exciting. We've got existing customers, we've got prospects, we've got people who have never heard of PlanetScale, and we're just happy to be back in person and happy to be able to tell people, what we are, alternative to the existing solutions, and just kind of, dig in with folks who are unhappy with their database or who are interested in a new one.
Mm-hmm. Get exposure to a lot of folks that, we're all online and accessible digitally. Makes a difference when we're in one place, wanting to find out more, learning what we don't know yet and finding new things.
Well, I love this conference. I mean, you get people from every industry, you get people from every level of seniority, from junior to senior executives, and it just gives you an opportunity to really test the talk track, to test the what the marketing team has put in your hands, and an opportunity to just really see, does this fall flat? It's much easier to tell if someone doesn't resonate with your pitch in person than over a Zoom when, maybe they're already halfway paying attention to something else anyway.
Interesting. I have another question about kind of data in the serverless environment.
Mm-hmm.
For data people, one of the first questions is, where is it?
Yep.
What do I have and where is it? And
yep.
Because it's oftentimes not managed or done by a certain team, it's done by everyone. When somebody spins up an instance wherever, and suddenly have a database running in the cloud. How do you think about that problem in a serverless environment? Where is my data? Where should it be?
Totally.
Is it being governed in the way of all the things you need to think about?
Well, that's a huge problem, right? And I think the trade-off of making things easier for developers is sometimes things get so easy that you end up with just kind of spaghetti data running all over the place. And so, I think the key for engineering leaders and the key for folks who are really trying to tackle this problem is establishing governance, is establishing best practices, and it's buying the right tools that make it as easy for your developers as possible to follow the right steps, right? Everyone just has a job. They want to wake up, they want to ship code, they want to delight their users, surprise and delight their users, and they'll do almost anything that they can to get there. And that's how you end up with this, data strung all over the place. So tools like what we offer, our goal is to provide a secure, a safe, an auditable environment, but one that's also as easy as a click of a button to get rolling with. Mm-hmm. So people don't ever have to look and go, well, this isn't going to work for me, I'm going to need this, I'm going to need that, and then all of a sudden you end up with user data all over the place. I think it's all about buying the right software and establishing the right workflows so that people can get done what they need to get done as quickly as possible, but kind of within the well-trodden path.
And there's taking shortcuts to be fast. There's also being efficient, right? Do I want to write that code? Hey, I've got this, let me use that.
Exactly.
Developers think that way all the time, right? Like, I have so many things to do. I don't want to have to build all that myself. Maybe I want to build some
100%.
part of it. But if I can do that, great. I can move on to the other thing. If I can use something where at least part of the compliance process is I'm aided by that tool or by that product. Less to do later, I'm happy with that.
Right.
Move on to fun stuff.
There's reason people love hiring lazy developers, right? It's like, because at the end of the day, you have something to get done, you have something to do. You want to get there as quickly as possible. No one wants to take the long route when it comes to giving something to a customer or building something. They want to get there the right way and the fastest way possible. That's right. And all the tools in the world are here to try and help you do that. But you, as a VP of engineering, a CTO, or something like that, you've got to be able to make the discerning choice or you end up with people just circumventing it and going around and doing what they want, which, with the amount of tools we've got these days is a dangerous proposition.
There's a lot of choices.
Yeah.
Well, cool. Where can folks find out more about PlanetScale? Check out what you've got. Maybe
So
play with it.
PlanetScale.com. Check us out. We have a great free tier. So if you're interested in just trying out PlanetScale, trying out the serverless database, sign up, spin up a database, go play around with it. We just launched PlanetScale Boost. Sign up for the beta there. We'll be letting more and more people in over the next few weeks. That's a query caching kind of materialization engine to help speed up your queries. But yeah, just try the platform out, give it a whirl, and see what you see, and give us any feedback if there's something you don't like.
Very cool. Well, Nick, thanks for stopping by.
My pleasure.
Great to have Nick Van
Wiggeren.
Thank you, with us here today and learn some more about PlanetScale. So please check it out. Some interesting technology with serverless. So always looking for ways to do things faster and more efficient.
Appreciate the time.
You bet. We'll see you soon with another great interview coming from reInvent at our Win studio for Techstrong TV.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hey folks, we're at AWS reInvent and we're talking with Rick Tam Daniels, who's head of partnerships and technology for Informatica. They just did some expanded partnerships with AWS and we're going to dive into that. Rick, welcome to the show.
Great, thanks for having me.
You guys have a long-standing partnership with AWS, so what exactly are you up to now and what's changing?
Well, so at Informatica, we, as you're right, we've had a long-standing relationship, more than 10 years. We've been working with AWS, and all our focus has been about really innovating and helping customers take their data assets, turn them into trusted data, and ultimately trusted outcomes. So what we announced this week were a bunch of new innovations with AWS that are really all focused around helping to democratize trusted data to all users in the enterprise. We're talking line of business users, developers, data scientists, really taking the power of trusted data out to everyone in the enterprise.
What's your sense of how much data is moving into the cloud? Or people still have stuff on premise? Is it kind of hybrid? Because data has gravity, right? It doesn't necessarily just lift and move by itself.
Yeah, absolutely. There is plenty of data still on premises, plenty of opportunity to get that data to the cloud. I think in the early days of cloud, you saw a lot of infrastructure-focused shifting of workloads and information. Today, what you're seeing is looking much more at the value of workloads and the transformational value they can have for a business perspective. So there's a lot of focus on taking core data systems, core data warehouses, data lakes, bringing them into the cloud to create a tremendous amount of agility and ability for customers to kind of leverage their data, which in today's economic climate, it's especially important as well that a lot of companies are finding themselves needing to transform again. They're facing new challenges, new opportunities, and data becomes a critical linchpin and be able to attack those opportunities and address those challenges.
Even before the cloud, most organizations were not especially good at managing data. Few of them would get a good housekeeping seal of approval for the way that they manage data. We move a lot of data up to the cloud. We have this notion of warehouses and lakes, and then it turns into a swamp.
Yeah.
What are people missing here? What's the thing that they should be thinking more about as they kind of think about moving data into the cloud? What's that thing that drives you crazy? Because it's a misstep and everybody does the same thing wrong.
I think one of the biggest things is two big points for customers. They understanding, first of all, what end state are they heading towards, right? Where are they heading? Where's the vector? Not just throwing a bunch of stuff into the cloud and hoping magic comes out of it. It's actually understanding how am I going to deal with things like data discovery, data cataloging, how am I going to govern all this data and make sure it doesn't become the data swamp. And we at Informatica, a lot of those customers you mentioned in the on-premise days, we help those customers really get a handle on their data and really help scale with data. We've done the same in the cloud. And over the last 5 years, we've invested more than $1 billion, with a B, $1 billion in R&D, building a fully cloud-native data management capability that helps customers get started quickly, that also realize the full supply chain and life cycle of data that they need in their enterprise to be successful with these data-driven initiatives.
Do you think that we're living in a multi-cloud world, or are we moving towards a hybrid cloud world where we're actually going to build applications that access data that resides in multiple places? Because it seems to me most people are doing what I would call multi-cloud, but they're far from hybrid cloud.
I would say yes. We're seeing all of the above, right? So we do see a lot more customers who are on a multi-cloud journey. They're going to live in a hybrid state for a long time as well, right? As they start to move systems incrementally, and being able to manage and govern a data environment that is distributed is a critical requirement for almost all of our customers.
Back in the day, we used to, the code would go to where the data was. And then seems like for the last 10 years, we've just been moving data up into the cloud and kind of hoping that the code will follow suit. But do you think we're going to see more application development on the cloud itself, where the applications are going to reside there, where the data is? Because ultimately, the laws of physics have not been suspended, right? We need to, latency is an issue, and we need the code as close to the data as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. And you do see a lot of traditional applications being moved to SaaS and cloud native. I think it's really important. And we see also on the analytics and AI side of things in particular as well, that work is happening where the data is. It's happening in the cloud. And actually, one of our big announcements we made this week was around taking the data management capabilities of our intelligent data management cloud platform and bringing them to developers inside of Amazon SageMaker. Right, so we're actually bringing the capabilities of data management, all cloud native, but making it available to those users who are actually taking that data and getting results from it. Right, so it is very important to have these both kind of move at the same time. Same reason also, you don't just move your warehouse without your data management. Right, it all needs to become cloud native. It needs to go to the cloud at the same time to have the most efficient management model for your data and analytics.
We hear a lot about data ops these days. Are you seeing folks adopting what appear to be best practices for data management? And why now? I mean, we've been having this issue forever.
Well, I think right now the data community, if you will, inside an enterprise is probably more expansive and more complex than it's ever been, right? And so you really need to have holistic frameworks that really connect the data producers with the data consumers, but do it in a way that creates governance and efficiency, doesn't create a lot of data duplication, right? You don't want data swamps, you don't want data silos, right? You really want your enterprise to be able to access its data, understand what it has, understand what that data means to the business, have trust in it, and then get access to it. And that's exactly what we're doing with our fully cloud-native data management platform.
There's also all these data scientists in the world now, and they're trying to manage data. Where do they fit in with the traditional IT organization in terms of how do I bring these cultures together?
Well, I think you kind of tapped on a big theme that we see around democratization of data, where we do see user personas, more personas, citizen data integrators, citizen data scientists who are out there in the line of business. They understand what the data means. They're not traditional IT, central IT folks. And so, they're also very important players in this whole ecosystem, and making sure that they can get the benefits of data management and they're not reinventing the wheel in their tools is really important. Again, this announcement we made basically takes all the connectivity, the years and years of knowledge about what are common data transformations, what are common data quality rules, and we're putting those directly in the hands of developers where they like to work, though, where the data scientists like to work. So they're incredibly important in this transformation affecting it, but they also need the same kind of data management tools and rigor that has traditionally been needed with IT.
Developers, of course, they have best DevOps practices that they adhere to, or hopefully. How will the DevOps teams and the data ops teams come together? And do I just throw them all in a room and lock the door and hope for something good? Or is there some advice that you can give to put these guys together in a way that's constructive?
Well, one of the big things, and this is another part of what we announced this week, is around our cloud data marketplace. So we've created, basically think of it as a storefront for all the enterprise data assets. And this storefront becomes incredibly important in that data democratization, and that it's bringing together all the knowledge of the data producers, the data owners, and putting it in the hands directly of the consumers, but also creating the interactions to make sure that we're in compliance with data privacy policies and things like that, and data use is being used correctly. And so what we announced with Amazon is the integration with Amazon or AWS Data Exchange. So AWS Data Exchange is a marketplace of public data sets, about 3,500 different data sets. And so now with this integration, customers can look not only at their own data through our data marketplace, but also what's available within AWS Data Exchange. So they can really have a one-stop shop for all of their data assets, but they have the confidence in where that data came from. They can see the lineage. They have a lot of trust in the data, which becomes fundamental to being able to really use that data as an asset.
Are you going to also work with other cloud providers? I would assume that you have relationships with those guys. Is the relationship different with Amazon versus them, or is it all pretty much even keel?
Well, Informatica occupies a very unique market position in that we have thousands and thousands of customers. And so all of our customers are across all the clouds. So we have strategic relationships with actually 4 cloud providers. So AWS, of course, and then Azure, Google, and Oracle Cloud as well, most recently. And that's because our customers want to use those different infrastructures. And Informatica is uniquely able to go deep into each of those ecosystems, which again is part of the announcements. These integrations with AWS just speak to how much we work closely with AWS product teams to make sure we deliver the best-in-class joint solutions. And in fact, we were actually awarded this week the 2022 Global Design Partner of the Year for AWS, right? So that means that we basically engage in the most integrations, innovations together. So Informatica is able to have strategic partnerships, but we're also able to go deep in those individual ecosystems and optimize data management to align to the strategies and the patterns that are being prescribed in that ecosystem.
So ultimately, what's your best advice to folks? Because not only are they dealing with, excuse me, try that again. So what's your best advice to folks? Because not only are they dealing with more data, I need water. Is this mine?
I don't know who's that.
All right, well. Just give me that thing there, can you? Yeah, one of those will do fine. Hey guys, I'll just use this Ricola, I'll be all right. All right.
The magic of editing.
All right. This is the last question, you'll be all right. All right. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. All right, you ready?
Yep.
All right. So what's your best advice to folks? Holy moly.
Don't worry about it. Clear it up. It's all that singing you did at the Aerosmith concert last night.
Must be. All right. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Okay. So what's your best advice to folks who are not only struggling with massive amounts of data, but are also, there's more types of data than ever. And it seems like as we go along, we keep just adding more and more types of data. We see a lot of video now. How are folks going to cope with all that? What's the thing that you wish that they would think about now before they get started?
I'd say 2 big things. One is when they go engage in these initiatives is understanding what business outcomes they're solving for and making sure they're focusing their efforts around their data to drive business outcomes, right? It's not just data for data's sake, it's actually to drive the business, right? The second thing, I think, to your point about how do you deal with all this proliferation of data governance is the linchpin of that. Every customer conversation I have, data governance is probably the hottest topic, right? But it's how do you achieve data governance in a way that's not off in a silo, that's not one team, but actually truly engages all the stakeholders in the data community to make sure that, again, data can be discovered, it can be prepared, it can be cleansed, it can be trusted, and ultimately delivered to the end users who need it quickly, right? I think that's the key here is having that governance to prevent the sprawl, prevent a lot of the problems of the past, but also as not just a protective measure, but also an accelerant, something that accelerates the use of data. And that's really our focus is helping customers accelerate and scale the adoption and use of trusted data to transform and drive outcomes.
All right, as they used to say, measure twice, cut once. It applies to data management. Hey, Rick, thanks for coming by.
Thank you so much, Mike. Appreciate it.
Take care.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hey guys, thanks for the throw. We're here with Ted Morocco, who's the CEO for Approve, and we're talking about the safety of software-defined vehicles, given the fact that they are so much dependent on software and APIs these days. Ted, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here, Mike.
We think about cars as kind of hardware in the grand scheme of things, but it's pretty clear these days that they are being more of a software-defined platform in much the same way that our phone is a platform for developing applications and deploying it these days. Have we given enough thought to the security of these environments? Because every time that we have historically added a new platform, security has been an afterthought, and maybe that might be not the time for this to happen.
Yeah, so you're right on target. The vehicle is a rolling laptop these days. In fact, I've even heard it's a number of laptops, because if you look at all of the different operating systems, most of them, Linux based in some sort, there's a lot of operating systems rolling around in that vehicle, and they all have APIs, and they're filled with sensors, and they're filled with a lot of communication going back and forth. And if you read the headlines, which I'm sure you do, virtually every major vehicle manufacturer has been hit with security issues, data breaches, and other things associated with their vehicles, from people being able to start the vehicle or monitor the location or pull payment information out of an app that's connected to the vehicle's account. So there's security problems all over the ecosystem, in the automotive sector, and it is a big problem. So I think this is a very good topic.
Today, the phone platform is this huge, massive ecosystem, but I wonder if the car will develop in the same way, or is that going to be a little more tightly controlled ecosystem, because we just can't have everybody and his brother creating an application for a car. So we might wind up with a scenario where the manufacturers are pretty much tightly controlling the software ecosystem that goes into that car.
Yeah, the manufacturers are trying to tightly control it, but the automotive industry is there's a supply chain in it. There's always been a supply chain when it came to everything from chassis and frames and wheels and bearings and engine components, and that model has been continued within the automotive sector to the electronics. So they are. Our experience, and we work with many of the major automotive manufacturers on protecting their mobile apps, but we're generally not dealing with the manufacturer directly. We're dealing with a subcontractor. So they are coming up with specifications and bids as to what functionality they want in the mobile app, and then they're generally, I wouldn't say always, but they're rolling it out to the lowest bidder. And there's an app development company out there that's responsible for producing, the apps and other systems that have access to APIs. And that's where a lot of the security breaches are coming from. Is that the secrets, the certificates, the fastest way to get the app out is not the most secure way to get the app out. So you have certificates being buried in apps in plain sight, and you have mechanisms where bots and other things can be used to, once you get access to an API, you can roll through the database and extract information, which could include personal data. It could include a lot of other sensitive information and information that might affect safety in the vehicle. So securing those APIs is got to become a bigger priority. And, we've seen lots of headlines, on these kind of breaches that are taking place. So,
yeah, everybody is talking about securing the software supply chain these days, but what in general is the challenge that you're seeing people have? And then specifically, is that more complicated for the automotive industry?
Well, for the automotive industry, I think that it is important that they select, vendors based on, they're not the low cost vendor necessarily. That they pick from vendors that have a track record in this space, and that are using best practices from a security perspective. And I think that they need to, in addition to passing down the functionality requirements, there has to be a series of specifications from a security perspective that address API access and encryption, and some of these details that are important, and maybe having a tighter control over it. We've worked with a number of the leading manufacturers and feel extremely strong about our technology when it comes to really securing the application from making sure that the phone itself has not been compromised or isn't jailbroken or isn't compromised, right through the application itself, including the API and including the back end on the server where information is being sent. So that whole channel needs to be protected from end to end, and that's a really important requirement. And the protection of secrets is another thing that becomes challenging, is because you not only have first-party APIs, but you have third-party APIs. So being able to protect access to third-party APIs is a important security precaution to take as well, because the manufacturer might not have control over all of the back ends. A mobile app may be connected to may have as many as a dozen different APIs that it's accessing, some of which are controlled by the manufacturer, some of which are third-party apps. So the whole chain, the whole complex network needs to be well protected from a secrets perspective.
Anytime there is a safety issue, it's not too long before government folks get involved. So do you think we'll see a lot more regulations in this space? Because all it will take is one crash for somebody to kind of stand up and go, hey, what's going on here?
Yeah, I think we will. The problem is the pace of government and the pace of the legal system is rather slow. And I think that, unfortunately, history has kind of told us that the legislation is almost a decade behind in the reality of what's going on. So I think it would be naive on the consumer's part to believe that the government is going to come to the rescue or the legal system is going to come to the rescue. Now, there obviously are the liability concerns, and the law from a liability perspective is quite robust, but in terms of regulating it, I'm not sure that the regulators understand the problem at a sufficient level today to solve the problem in the near future. So I think it's going to take the CISOs, to really, and the CTOs of these companies to be forward thinking, and they have to balance cost, but there are very well known best practices that can be taken, and there's also pen testing and other things that need to be invested in, to try to see if you build the security in, but then you really need to turn the hackers loose and see what kind of damage they can do and what access they can get to it to do a complete job, in terms of developing these things, the automobiles of the future.
We do know of organizations that either buy or lease fleets of vehicles for a variety of purposes. Will the CISOs for those companies have to figure out how to secure what amounts to a new platform in much the same way that they secure any type of server or endpoint?
Yeah, they will. They will have to figure it out, and we've actually worked with one of them. It's a notable one. We've seen some interesting things going on in the car sharing space as well, and we have a large automotive account that uses our technology for car sharing, and the challenge they faced there was more financial, in that hackers were trying to unlock and get into vehicles so that they could drive them off the lot and part them out. So, securing that, it made a lot of financial sense, to address that issue. And they were very thorough in the way that they evaluated the technology, and the choices that they made. And we've had no problems, all of the issues that they were facing have gone away. So that, they're going to have to get involved in it. And it isn't a problem that you can easily outsource, to a sub.
Is this problem going to get more complicated? Because it seems like every year a new wave of cars or vehicles are rolling off the manufacturing line, and they're increasingly driven by software, and they have thousands of processors in them. as we go forward, does this become something every year that we're going to see kind of this spike in attacks because there's going to be new APIs and new components that people can go after? And it seems like the cyber criminal community is pretty active in this space already.
Yeah, they are. They're extremely active. We will see more of it. The types of attacks are going to change. The nature of the attacks will change and will evolve as the defenses evolve. So it's going to be, it's going to be job security for a lot of people who are in this industry, because it will be, a game of cat and mouse, and we will continue to see new vectors and new defenses pop up for different things. And that brings me to kind of another point that is important for CSIOs to think about, is that you don't want to build, the security for yesterday's, problems. You want to put in place security mechanisms that can be updated. And I had a conversation just last week with a very forward-thinking, automotive company. And the problem that they were dealing with was that they knew that they could protect their mobile app for today's threats, but they were concerned about the ability to update the security and not have to re-release, their mobile application when a new threat emerged. So that you need to be able to have that ability, just like you do with other systems, to auto update and to push out new security patches to the mobile application without having to rewrite the code and go through the whole release process through the App Store, because that can delay things, and it takes a long. So if there is a vulnerability, it takes a long time for the new app to get to everybody who's driving that vehicle, and it leaves a lot of people vulnerable. So being able to push updates and take into account new threats instantaneously, or as soon as they're detected and as soon as they're fixed, to be able to change the certificates and update the certificates so that if bad actors are using our access, you can change things and you can update, the security measures in those devices. So that's an important piece of it.
And the threat itself may not be targeted specifically at the cloud. If there's all these APIs, let me try that again. All right. The threat itself might not be specifically aimed at the vehicle because it has all these APIs and it's connected to all these external services. So the attack may be coming through one of these external services, right?
Correct. Yeah. And that's, that's one of the things that is very important from our perspective. And one of the things we kind of innovated in is that you want to be able to do what's called app attestation, which means that the back end wants to be able to determine if the API request is coming from a genuine, non-modified mobile app. Because what the hackers do is they basically modify the app or find a way to imitate a genuine app and make those API calls. And they can do that with bots, and they can do that with man-in-the-middle attacks. There's a lot of things that can be done. So you want to make sure that your back end is talking to only a genuine, untampered with mobile application, not talking to a network of bad actors, a network of bots that is set up by bad actors to extract information from the back end databases. So those are preventable, and that is an addressable, solvable capability today.
Do you think there'll be subsystems in the car that are essentially firewalls and detection systems for these types of attacks that somebody's going to build as well, just like we do in traditional IT environments?
Yeah, I think that there already are, and a lot of them have been put in place because of some of the breaches that have taken place. And I think that we will see more of those as well, in the future. The security will get better, but so will the tactics and the attack methods of the bad guys.
Yeah. What's your confidence level in these vehicles then? Would you put your family in these things? You feel good about driving these things, or are you a little concerned?
Well, I am very privacy motivated and aware of some of the problems. So there are things that are within the user's control. So one of the things that I suggest and do myself is that when you install apps, there's usually a series of questions that most people just click I agree and accept the defaults. And I don't tend to do that. You know, every app you pretty much install these days wants access to all of your information, your location, your contacts, your call history, et cetera. And there's no reason for it. So you want to be careful about what permissions you give. And then you also want to be careful about what else you integrate into your vehicle. Like one of the things you can do I have a Tesla, and you can connect apps within the console to it. I'm very wary of that because I know that if you connect an app and there's a security breach within their app, it's connected to your data, and your data could get out through every connection that you enable. So only enable the permissions and the connections with things that are really essential and important to you. So you should be pretty concerned that way. And then there are other things you can do from a security perspective. Is that you can limit some of the features in the vehicle. You can turn things off. So for example, again, I'll single out Tesla. It's very common for people to break into Teslas with the door handles that present themselves automatically, because you can take if your key is emitting an RF signal, thieves have figured out a way to use antennas to collect that signal, aim it at the doors, and open up a vehicle, even if the key's inside your house. So you can turn off that feature that the door handles will present themselves to you, and you can prevent that type of attack. So there's just basic common sense, and generally you got to be a little wary of why they're asking you for permission for certain things, and if it's not necessary, don't provide it.
All right, folks, you heard it here. If it connects to the internet, no matter how mobile it is, it still has an attack surface that needs to be defended. Ted, thanks for being on the show.
Hey, Mike, appreciate it. Thank you.
All right, back to you guys in the studio.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hey guys, thanks for the throw. We're here with Almog Apirian, who's the CEO for Silo, and we're talking about cybersecurity costs, which we all would kind of like to rein in, but we don't necessarily want to sacrifice security to achieve that goal. So we're going to try to figure out how to navigate this issue in a way that allows everybody to have their cake and eat it too, as it were. Almog, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Great being here.
So the issue of the day, of course, is that everybody's under a little bit of economic pressure. Some people, though, believe that cybersecurity spending is, shall we say, recession resistant. I don't know if I've ever met a completely recession resistant technology in my life, but it's an interesting idea. What's your sense of where are people in their mindsets about cybersecurity spending at the moment, and what are the challenges?
Yeah, so first of all, I think that the cybersecurity space is pretty wide, and there are different products that are solving different problems. And I think we are providing secure access. We connect employees and third parties with the fastest and most secure zero trust access to everything, everywhere. And this is something that is not only providing a security solution, but also enabling the business to work with more employees that are connecting from anywhere and more third parties. And there is a difference if I compare it to a system that is doing security analytics, for example, which the value is pure security. And I think that especially if we are looking at next year and all the projections and things around that, I think that there is a difference because the cyberspace is pretty wide. And there is a difference between different tools that are solving different problems. And I think that the places that CISOs, I'm a recovering CISO. I was a CISO, and in my previous role, I was in charge of the Israeli Navy cybersecurity unit for quite some time. So I'm coming from the other side, from the customer side. And I think that the places that we need to put our focus in are places that are solving the business problems. We want to build these very good brakes to enable the business to drive fast and to go forward with digital transformation. So this is my, my focus in a nutshell, especially when when thinking about challenging periods like COVID and this recession that all of us need to deal with.
Are there areas where people will spend less in to spend more in others, or is it more of an issue of it's kind of like an arms race and you got to keep spending on these different segments, but you can't really pull back from other segments?
Yeah, so I think that this is something that I talked about in a previous interview about like the budget process that is going on in a lot of organizations. In my previous role, it was something that started at September, usually ended up around November, and we started the process with 750 projects, and at the end of the journey, we had like 150 projects that were budgeted. I think that in challenging periods like this year and even 2020, when a lot of organizations had to keep the business running and to support the organizations during COVID, I think that in this situations, because of the fact that both IT and security teams are in the wrong side of the balance sheet, they are expected to do more with less. And there is a lot of pressure around efficiency and around headcount, around the internal resources. And I think that it is expected to have some kind of a budget, let's call it forces that will take the budget and potentially will shrink the budget. What I think that this thing is going to put CIOs and CISOs in a place that they will have to prioritize things again. And I think that the way to prioritize correctly, you cannot provide things that are not supporting the business main initiatives. If there are things that are pure security with no clear business value, so these projects are going to be deferred most probably in challenging areas like in challenging periods like this year, in my opinion.
How much of a budget do most security executives kind of actually control versus advising the CIO what to go spend money on? What's that balance between, what do I give the security team direct control over versus what I tell the IT operations team to go implement from as a security operation, for example?
Yeah, so it's a good question. I think that in a lot of cases like ours, it is something that is combining both the security team and the IT team. We are dealing with networking teams, and that are in a lot of organizations are part of the IT department, and we are dealing with the security team. So this thing is something that is part of the projects of these two departments, like firewalls, like VPNs, like network access controls, a lot of controls that resides in the network space. So when thinking about this thing, so there are three main aspects, and this is basically one of the things that I like about what we're doing in Ciolo, because I think that again, as a security practitioner for quite some time, I think that we get used to think that there is kind of a triangle of trade-off between security, operational agility, and user experience. You improve one and you pay with the two others. And I think that the thing that we like about what we're doing here in Ciolo is that we are kind of breaking the equation so customers and organizations can get better security, better operational agility. They can deliver on business requirements faster, to do it more efficiently, and also they can improve their users' productivity and user experience, basically. So there is this trade-off that we get used to, but it's not necessarily the case with all the new technologies that are out there in the market. Like there is an option to have win-win-win. A win for the security team, a win for the IT team, and a big win for the users.
The unfair aspect of this is it seems like the bad guys have unlimited budget these days. They can pretty much get funding anywhere they want just by robbing more money from more people. So, however, we have seen the price of crypto crash. So, are the bad guys experiencing some economic issues as well?
I think that they're working with very sophisticated methods, and I think that They have a lot of let's call it revenue stream to fund their activities because at the end of the day, it's successful. The bad guys are successful. They are making a lot of money. They are making more and more money year over year. So this trend is pretty much clear and out there.
We hear a lot about all things zero trust these days. It doesn't strike me that this is something I roll out of bed and go buy per se. It's more of a journey. And so most organizations, how far away are they from zero trust and what exactly is involved from your perspective?
Yeah, I think that there is a little confusion in the market around zero trust and the differences between zero trust, which is a perception and a framework, to zero trust access or ZTNA. ZTNA is a name of a market or a product, and zero trust access basically it's a framework talking about the fact that you need to control your own destiny and that everything should be based on identity. If I try to debug this big thing called zero trust, so the way that we look at it, we think that and to be honest, it's kind of funny. Like computer systems were designed to serve people, and people are the biggest risk for your digital assets and computer systems. So we are concentrating on connecting people, digital assets, and we work according to the zero trust framework. Obviously, we let our customers to control their own destiny. We don't keep anything that can be sensitive for them in our cloud because they don't need to trust anyone, including ourselves. And everything is spinning around identity. And when we went out to the market and started working with customers, we realized that in a lot of cases, organizations are building mountains of foundations that are relatively weak because the identity infrastructure in a lot of organizations are not strong enough. And I will give you one example. You can use the most secure zero trust access solution in the world, but if all of your users are using user one as username and password or operator one as username and password without MFA, so it's not going to be secure. So you need to make sure that this disconnect between the persona and the user is being eliminated, and you're providing very, very narrow access, never network access, application level access to assets that you want to connect people to. So again, there is a confusion between zero trust. It's a big thing. It's a perception to zero trust access. And the way that we look at it, we need to start mitigating the biggest risks first. And it's always around people. People are the biggest risk for computer systems.
So you're the security person and you walk into the board and you have a CFO and a CEO there and you basically say, we need to do zero trust based on identity. And they kind of look at you and go, well, what the hell have we been doing all these years? Because I thought we had passwords and identity. So what exactly is that nuance with identity today that people need to understand?
Yeah, I think that the transition that is happening out there is the world understand that you need to change the way that you're connecting employees and third parties or users in general to computer systems. And the change is the transition from something that is based on IP addresses, private networking approach, to something that is based on identities. You know when VPNs were invented? 1996. 96. It was great back then. It was great. But nowadays, this is not the situation anymore that you can put all of your users, their endpoints, and all of the systems in one private network. This is not the situation. Nowadays, you have users connecting from everywhere. They connect remotely. They connect from the office. They connect from production floors. They connect from everywhere, from every geography, to assets that can run in the organizational data center, co-location service, infrastructure as a service side, like your VPC, your GCP side, your Azure side, and your consuming SaaS applications. So you have users spread all over, and applications to resources holding sensitive information and running critical processes And the only thing that can connect between users that are all over to applications to resources that are all over, and they are not at the same network anymore, is the identity that you can verify. It's the only thing that is out there. So identity effectively became the new key when thinking about nowadays, let's call it organizational cyberspace. There's nothing else that you can base this ability to connect users to digital assets. Because if you ask me what is the reason that we founded this company, and so we think that it is a very big problem. Digital transformation not be secure without this very basic capability of gaining visibility, but also the ability to set policy of who can connect where and what this user can do while it's connected. And we are providing this very, very fundamental layer in order to support organizations on their digital transformation journey. And there's nothing apart from identity that can be the right key in order to do it.
There are a lot of things that have identity. There can be people, machines, applications, and it gets complex pretty quickly. So will we need some form of AI to save us from ourselves, or is that just wishful thinking?
No, I think that we need to make sure that all the components are speaking identity. If you have users, and what we see in quite a lot of organizations is that, I'll give you a few examples. A lot of organizations are using generic accounts that are being transferred between, different people, different departments, different third parties. So if something happened Friday at 3 a.m. and you try to figure out who did it, it's operator one. So you don't really know who is operator one because there is a disconnect between the persona and the credentials. Well, and there are ways to do it. Like we are providing a way to deal with generic accounts. The other direction is one person holding a lot of user accounts to different systems. And then the user lifecycle can become a nightmare. Like I can be Almog, I can be Almog -A, Almog.A, and a bunch of different users, but I'm the same person. So this thing of making sure that there is a strong alignment between the key to these credentials is very much important. And this is not the situation nowadays in a lot of organizations. And the reason for it is that organizations want to do it, but there is a compatibility problem. You cannot provide MFA, for example, to all of your users across all of your applications, even if you're using Okta or Azure AD, because a lot of systems are not working with this technology called SAML, right? So you have islands of users, and this disconnect around the user identity is there. So it should be fixed. And yeah, definitely AI can help with a lot of things. But here, we need to make sure that we know who is the person behind this access attempt. And it's not so complicated to do it if you're using the right technologies.
All right. So a lot of cybersecurity folks out there are generally stressed out. What's your best advice to them going into 2023 about how to cope with the world?
I think that, I think that we need to concentrate on the things that are contributing to business. My question number one to every security leader in the world is what is the nightmare in the management room? What is this thing that they're afraid of the most? Because I think that these are the places that the security leaders should go and fix first. The things that are contributing to the business stability, and then to go and deal with all the best practices that us security practitioners know how to do. But we must be these very good breaks in order to enable the business to buy fast. So this is my advice, and I think that this is the way to make security a game changer for the business. This is my 2 cents.
All right, folks, you heard it here. Once you put a name on your greatest fear, it becomes less scary. So you work from there. Almog, thanks for being on the show.
Thank you, Mike. It was a pleasure.
All right, and back to you guys in the studio.
Hi again, everyone. I hope you all enjoyed today's episode of Techstrong TV. We had some amazing interviews with industry professionals to give you the latest in the tech world. We'll be back again on Thursday, so we hope to see you then. But in the meantime, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. As always, stay strong. Techstrong.